Welcome again, everyone, to TNS Radio Ireland. You're listening to Mike Montagne, original 1968 architect of mathematically perfected economy, speaking on mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. Original material, analyses, and solution, as always, are copyright and trademarked by yours truly. All rights and therefore claims of authority are reserved. Archives of this program can be downloaded freely from perfectedeconomy.org/FTP. Copies can be distributed freely only so long as the entirety of this program, including this copyright and trademark notice, remain intact. Much thanks to the band Q-Ree of Chicago, Illinois for Patty Ryan's Despair. Find their music at qree.com. That's spelled C-U-R-O-I. Good to have you with us again, Mike Montagne. We've got Ivan, Belastinko again over there in the UK. We're going to be speaking about a few different things today. The main thing I wanted to cover was this Ben Gilroy's presentation at this Irish eviction, foreclosure eviction, which was stopped by citing Constitution, I believe, Regulation 40 or Section 40. Anyway, got Ivan here today, and wanted to start out with, we've had quite a few split controversies here at TNS over the past few days. I'm not going to mention some of them because some of the behavior is ought to be long. It belongs below the radar here. We've already dealt with it, and the rest has somewhat ugly implications for our future. Unless we can agree on what our problems are and what their solution is. Now, that's why this, some people may presume, I think most people don't presume anything like this, that, I'm just a nasty guy and that's why I challenged Roger Hayes just a few days ago. But what we really need to get at here is the matters at hand and how are we going to go to court. This pertains to this Ben Gilroy eviction event of just a few days ago. You all heard Roger try to explain that what's wrong with interest is that it's not created. Well, I was unfortunately I was going to pre-record my program today, but I had some important calls from some people who are instrumental in the let's say political organization and related affairs today, and until a few minutes ago I was busy on the telephone. So nonetheless, I'd gone over some of my material that I've collected over the years, and I have, screenshots of Roger Hayes' web pages when this lawful bank was more or less appeared to be something akin to a multi-level marketing scheme. You were going to be able to open your own branch, so get in soon, and you were going to share in the profits of the bank and whatnot, and somehow over better than a year, this is morphed more and more and more into mathematically perfected economy, except it's advocated by Roger Hayes as if he was the author of it, and as you heard Roger explain himself, people better understand him, so he claims. In fact, another TNS host actually came at me with that proposition that we need to explain this in a different way. They didn't suggest how, but somehow that Roger was more understandable just because he claimed to be so. Well, now, if somebody claims that what's the problem with interest is it isn't created, If we were paying attention to the monetary reform movement, we would understand exactly where that came from. Who's the first person to introduce that proposition? Well, it wasn't Roger. The first I heard it was Ellen Hodgson Brown, and it comes from Ellen's own obfuscation of my thesis of inevitable failure, which doesn't at all hold that it's because interest isn't created. And what Ellen was doing was she was promoting the idea that the interest needed to be put into circulation too at the time of the loan, is what she was advocating, but which wouldn't be the actual solution if this was a solution at all, because you'd only need it in circulation down the road when it was spent out of circulation. So that isn't necessarily when you would introduce it at the time of the loan, but she was advocating spending the interest into circulation so it could be paid out of circulation, which is preposterous. Because the person that discovers what's wrong with interest discovers it through the root of unraveling this obfuscation of the currency, which shows that the bank has no rightful claim not only to the principal, but not to the interest either, because the banking system has no property at stake. There is no risk. We are not borrowing money from banks. And these arguments, therefore, are imperative to going on and protecting our properties from foreclosure, from bankruptcy, from failure of our government, from purported austerity, which we can't even succeed in because we cannot pay off the debts. We can't even pay down the debts of the federal government. No country in the world is in any situation where they can do that. Why? We have, for instance, Ronald Reagan here from the first of the 1980s, reduced federal tax rates 10% per year for 3 years, claiming that would balance the federal budget. More money was to circulate around. Business would be able to pay a greater volume of taxes on a greater volume of commerce because government was stealing less from them. Well, they found out he didn't succeed in that. And I explained why they wouldn't succeed in that to the 1979 Reagan campaign. And the reason was, and the further escalation of private indebtedness would make it less possible for commerce to transpire. So that additional commerce wasn't even going to happen. And indeed, it didn't. Right? So Reagan accumulated. It was already obvious. I predicted that he would accumulate far more debt than any president before him, which is the general trend of multiplication of falsified indebtedness as ever-escalating sums of periodic interest are borrowed back into circulation, or in the case of federal overspending, are spent into circulation, merely to account for what were this ever greater sums of interest that we're paying out of circulation. So we're borrowing it back either privately or through federal government as an ever escalating sum, escalating itself at an escalating rate of ever greater sums of periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt. So this is why the Reagan administration, when all these failures were obvious, was, they called me and they wanted to know if I could predict this failure accurately somehow. And I explained, well, we could basically calculate exactly when it would happen by creating computer models which simply borrowed the interest and principal we're paying out of circulation back into circulation until we accumulated such a sum of debt as exceeded our ability to service it from the circulation any longer, which therefore would destroy our creditworthiness to borrow further and precipitate in the final stages of the failure, which would be rapid deflation. So they asked me to produce the models. I did. They calculated the maximum possible lifespan 1983 and 4 and projected this failure at approximately 2010 AD as a consequence of the obfuscation of the currency. So now, why would anyone say that it's because the interest isn't created that we have a problem with interest, which he didn't even say what it was. Roger didn't say that it precipitated in terminal indebtedness, that it would fail governments, that it would precipitate in fiscal irresponsibility, which would be impossible to solve. So he could call that insoluble fiscal irresponsibility. So he didn't say this. He just said because the interest didn't exist. And I tried to explain that no one who had ever actually figured this out. And Roger said, well, I'm about the same age as you. I could have figured it out at the same time. And he hasn't. In fact, I was listening to a recording of Roger speaking to a group within the past year where he's explaining that he's studied this for 35 years, which is 10 years less than I prescribed mathematically perfected economy, and that only 2 years ago did anyone have this sorted out in any such way that we could understand it. He claimed in speaking to his audience that you wouldn't have understood this if I tried to say it 2 years ago. But now, thanks to many videos and so on and so forth, excuse me, I get a smoky room here with a major windstorm outside and the wind blowing the smoke down the chimney through the fire, the wood stove here. Anyway, so people couldn't understand this a few years ago, but thanks to movies or videos, he says, such as Debt as Money. Then he corrects himself and says money as debt. And then he tells his audience, who already has demonstrated by the question that they asked that they understand these issues more than Roger does. He tells his audience, if they want to understand money, to go watch the movie, the video, Paul Greenon's Plagiarism of My Work, which he misunderstands it so much that he blames our problems on debt and claims that money can't be a debt. Whereas you wouldn't have even been in the house that you're having foreclosed now if you weren't allowed to assume what's not a debt, but is a promissory obligation. An obligation to pay off that home as you consume of it so that you can possess it throughout your life instead of possibly only at the end of it. So the problem isn't money as debt, and we don't find out that the problem of interest, which precipitates, as I've said many times, precipitates an inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of falsified indebtedness. This is an argument you need to understand because it's what you needed to take to court with you when you were already in court, so you wouldn't have the problem of this foreclosure proceeding, which I'm about to speak about further. So I replied to Roger, and the significance of this reply is that you can pay the debt, the insufficiency of a circulation to pay interest isn't a problem at all, because a circulation of $1 can pay all the principal of eternity, so long as we can earn it back from a bank. I had a later discussion with Vin, and Vin told me that he heard pennies dropping everywhere, that people suddenly got it, that it's not that there isn't enough. See, you want to combine these preposterous assertions of mere pretenders who say money's created out of thin air. It is not created out of thin air. Money is created out of nothing. It's not created out of nothing. We're going to create money out of nothing, Roger said the other day. No, you're not going to create it out of money. You created liquidity, and you're going to have a responsibility to pay it back. So you're not eliminating debt. But he was claiming to eliminate debt in the time of this presentation that he gave. And here the other day he was claiming that interest is a problem because it's not created, and yet you can pay all the principal and interest of eternity on a minimal circulation of $1, so long, only so long, as all of us can earn that dollar enough times from the banks so that it returns to circulation, not only without increasing debt, but in a way that we can pay debt down. But we have to earn that dollar that many times in order to do so. Now, that's simple math. We all understand that. And in fact, in the earlier stages of the lifespan of any purported economy subject to interest, people do pay their debts back with interest. So why would we think that's the problem? That's preposterous. What happened is Ellen Hodgson Brown plagiarized my work because of the inspiration of my parable of perfect economy, which has been plagiarized not only by Ellen Hodgson Brown, but Stephen Zarlinga, Bill Stills, etc., etc., etc. Literally hundreds of thousands of times and now millions of times, and people come back arguing to me that Benjamin Franklin advocated spending money into circulation. It has to be gifted into circulation. Stojan Natovic has been all over the internet claiming this for years, just for example. And he cited my own arguments, which are my own words, issued through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin, in a story that's been plagiarized by all these pretenders. Ellen Hodgson Brown took my explanation and said herself, well, no one can understand that, or I understand it to be a different thing, that the interest wasn't created. And so not only did she utter a mistruth by obfuscating my work into her pretended discovery, that discovery doesn't even exist, because it isn't the fact that the interest isn't introduced to circulation in addition to the principal. It's that we can't earn it all back from the banks. This is the thing we all have to understand. And the reason we have to understand that is here these people are being foreclosed upon. Well, if you listen to that event, the sheriff said, well, did you ask these questions when you borrowed the money? And the Ben Gilroy said, well, we're educating him. He wasn't educated now. We're educating him. And his domain name is freefromalldebt.com. Can he possibly understand what the arguments are then? No. There may be some constitutional argument that this guy didn't have some authority to perform the foreclosure at that very moment. But that's only been forestalled, because now that foreclosure's got to go back to the court, and they have to decide something somewhere. Now, this sheriff might have said to himself, you know, fellas, those people were all excited, you know, and before we got them too excited, there was only 3 of us. So I decided we come back here, and the next time we go, we're going to have to go with 50 guys. You know, that's how we're going to perform this thing. But what are we going to do? They say this is against the Constitution. So I read it today, and it looks like it may be. Okay, but then again, if the judge signed the order and I performed it, it would be the same thing. And it's my duty to interpret this as a judge would, and I deem that I'm within the rights of the law, and they don't have any real legitimate philosophical objection to this even, because there's a debt, they're in default. What you're asking that sheriff to do is to resolve the situation. He's got to say, well, they claim there's no debt. How can there be no debt? They assumed a debt. They fully know that. They signed a contract to assume a debt. They fully know that. What's more, can we allow them? Would we want a society? Could we possibly serve ourselves if we could all just acquire our each other's production, those few of us who might produce under these conditions, by simply signing a piece of paper that we would pay for it when we won't? That's what you're asking if you're saying you don't have a debt. And that's why these arguments are so important. First,
Mike, can I just jump in there on the sheriff thing that you just mentioned?
Well, let me finish this, because I'm on a little bit of roll here. I want to go with this. Okay. The problem here is you're asking the sheriff to resolve all these things. Now, you do have a debt. You're not able to pay for this debt, and you probably got a gut ache when you wrote that piece of paper, when you signed it, because you knew that you were going to pay whatever it is, depends on the rate of the interest and the term of the loan, but maybe it was 3 houses, 1 house in principal and 2 houses in interest. Maybe it's 1 house in principal and 3 houses in interest, or 4 houses in interest. Whatever it is, you're going to pay 3, 4, 5 houses for a house to an entity which, if you had educated yourself at the time, you would have found that that entity gives up no lawful consideration commensurable to the debts which it therefore falsifies to itself. The debt is not to the bank, but it's restored then to it remains what it is, a promissory obligation, an obligation to only pay the principal. You haven't really borrowed it. You're actually convicting yourself to contributing so much to the pool of wealth so that the real creditor who gave up the house for a promissory obligation can receive according to what they've given up from your not only your production but what all of us are contributing into production, and your commitment is to the extent of the principal. So the important things about this promissory obligation situation is that the debt isn't to the bank has no property at stake, interest isn't justified. That means you never owed the bank the interest for sure, and though you might have paid the principal to the bank, it was not the bank's property. Because as I've explained in Parable of Perfect Economy and in many of the other programs, a promissory obligation only represents value so long as it remains a commitment to pay to deliver so much value to the overall pool of wealth. When it's fulfilled, it no longer represents such a thing. It's canceled from existence. It's retired from existence. So the payments of principal aren't the bank's property, but we might rightly, nonetheless, delegate the authority or responsibility to the banking system to retire our payments of principal. But that doesn't enrich in the bank. So here's the problem then. That's the right resolution of our matter. That's what our debt should be. And if you claim that's what your debt should be by the arguments that we provided for over a year now in detail, over and over again, many ways, then you can prevail, because that's the only right state of your debt. Now, here's the other thing about this. These people who are being foreclosed upon, they intended to fulfill that debt at one time. They intended to fulfill that debt until they couldn't fulfill the debt, because this multiplication of falsified indebtedness by interest has precipitated in a global monetary failure. It's happening in the United States. Just a week ago, the San Francisco Chronicle published that 88 million people of working age are out of work in the United States and have given up the hope of re-employment. 88 million. That's over 40% of the population. That qualifies as a full-blown depression, ladies and gentlemen. And 10,000 homes a day have been going into foreclosure here since approximately 2005. So, it is very important to understand then, not that we have a problem because the interest isn't created, but that this obfuscation of the currency forces us to maintain a vital circulation by perpetual further borrowing, because it's impossible to earn all that from the banks, because the banks, there isn't that much to own, and there isn't any plausible way that the bank wants to appear or overtly to be simply purchasing so much of our production as they're publishing money. You see, we would associate that then with a crime. We would see that, my God, they're just basically counterfeiters, and they have to buy our debts from us immediately so that we can continue to service whatever costs they impose on us. So that we buy a house, we assume a debt, they buy it from us immediately so that it doesn't multiply debt into terminal debt, and then we pay so much rent as we would have or more than a mortgage. The problem is that this multiplication of falsified indebtedness causes the inability of these people to service their mortgage anymore. So the banking system is at fault for precipitating artificial conditions which prevent people from even servicing their debts any longer. Now that we're suffering this global failure, we realize, we have to educate ourselves. But that isn't because there's no debt. We haven't realized that there's no debt. There's no fact that there's no debt at all. There is a debt. But so, understanding the obfuscation has done something. It's imposed terminal conditions on us. We cannot persist in servicing our debt. We aren't persisting in servicing our federal debts across the world. Every federal government, every state, provincial government is in deep trouble around the world. They're far beyond possibility of return to solubility. Far beyond it. And they can't be restored to solubility under this system because it can only multiply indebtedness all the further so long as we maintain a circulation in any way that's available to us. So the banks have caused the failure. They are in fact responsible for this person not being able to pay their debt. So then, if we resolve the debt to what it should be, what are we going to do? We would count all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, and we would impose this obligatory schedule of payment, which was the other thing that mathematically perfected economy is two things: an eradication of interest. Roger couldn't explain why or how. Okay. The other thing is an obligatory schedule of payment, and he claimed we should just pay the house off in 25 years. And he says at the end of the day, it's all the same. Oh, sorry, not even close. If the lifespan of the house, he claimed mathematically perfected economy had a fault because you couldn't determine what the lifespan is exactly. You don't have to determine what the lifespan is exactly, and I've never advocated determining what the lifespan is exactly. What you want to determine, and this is defined in my glossary of terms, has been for more years than Roger could even baby talk about all this stuff. It's defined under the term proprietary determinant lifespan. All right. And what a proprietary determinant lifespan, it's a complicated definition, necessarily so, because it's a legal state, which allows you to finance gold. Well, you say gold has an infinite lifespan, so, or virtually infinite, So, how could you possibly finance it? Because there would be no payments. Well, you're right. But we only finance it for certain conditions of holding for a certain amount of time. For instance, an industry that buys gold to use in, let's say, electrical conducts of some computer hardware is allowed to purchase the gold that it will need, but it's only financed under mathematically perfected economy over a proprietary determinate lifespan. And I've already explained this on TNS radio. You can go back where some fellow from Idaho Republic, a political party over here, asked me that question. I answered it live. Okay, so it's already on a TNS broadcast, the answer to it. But anyway, so the gold is financed for how long that company has to hold it for manufacturing and to get it onto shelves of distributors, and then over a reasonable time that it might be sold. And then it exists in a product that has a lifespan, and that can be only financed for a proprietary determinate lifespan as well, which is limited to its most short-lived component, and the proprietary determinant lifespan falls somewhere short of that, which is enough to assure that, with few exceptions, that we pay for whatever we consume over a lifespan very close to its full lifespan, but somewhere short of it, so that there is no punitive damage imposed upon the system by the fact that people don't pay for something that they consume, and there isn't enough lifespan left to reacquire that from that person, to protect society, transfer its ownership to somebody else who resumes payment for the item then. But in the case of Roger's purported 25-year proposition, as opposed to 100-year lifespan of a home, he says at the end of the day it's all the same. Well, it's not all the same at all. You're paying 4 times as much over the lifespan. And let's just consider how that reflects upon a few situations. It means your 1/4 is soluble. If you do this for all things that are financed by promissory obligations, your 1/4 is soluble in all ways. That's a huge disparity. All right. Now, you can increase the advantages more than they already are in mathematically perfected economy, because then you're paying things for a rate less than as you consume of them. All right. So that's how all those issues resolve out. But let's think about all this now. So if this foreclosure had been defended by mathematically perfected economy, the person had signed our mandate, had offered it up to the court, had registered a piece of paper at the court, which said, I've signed this mandate and I'm claiming these arguments, and these are the sections to see for a proof that the debt is not to the bank, that the debt reverts to the natural state of a promissory obligation, and that the rate of payment has to be equal to the rate of consumption of that item over the lifespan of the item, the proprietary determinate lifespan of the item. You guys don't like extra terms, so I don't say that all the time, but that's a fact. It's in my glossary. I've explained it to be so. And so if anyone ever raises the question, I point them to the glossary. It explains all this. And we have it explained in the case of financing gold. So now, say you're 50 years old and you've moved around the world all your life or whatever, and now you want to own a home, okay? So you would pay for it over the next 25 years of life and die, while you had built up 75 years of equity in paying that much under mathematically perfected economy, and all the equity would actually remain in your accounts. I've fully detailed out the accounting system, which is very, very, very simple. So what happens is, $100,000 home, this person, you, for example, pays $100,000 over 25 years, where they would have paid under mathematically perfected economy $25,000 and had, over their retired lifespan of 25 years, a full further $75,000 to sustain some style of standard of living over that. That's a huge disparity. So all the Rogers buddies are going hee-haw, and this guy's ripped off mathematically perfected economy and this purported lawful bank are totally wrong. Even on those few details, there's a huge disparity in what he's proposing to do. And there's another matter altogether. And that is, he's claiming it's a lie, the very name of this bank, lawful bank, it's a lie. You look up your own laws and you'll find he has no authority whatsoever under any existent laws to create such a bank. I know people who tried 35 years ago to create a bank in England which didn't charge interest for money, for promissory obligations. Okay, now there are laws that prevent anyone from doing this. So these people can hee-haw all they want, and yet this bank is never going to happen. And Roger just pretending that he realized the same things is as phony gets, and he's pretending that it's all the same at the end of the day. That's as far off as, he's not even doing the most casual math on these matters. So let's get serious about these things. Do we want to actually argue in court of law that we don't have any debts, that debts are not ours, and that's all the domain names over this incident, claim that it's not our debt.com or whatever it is, whatever, totally free of debt.com or whatever. These are the kinds of names. These people have assumed that there's no debt and that they're going to establish such a fact. But they assumed a debt when they signed a piece of paper. And we all know that if we're going to create so much wealth that a true creditor can receive for their contributions to the pool of wealth, so much as they've contributed, we have to contribute it. And that's by paying these debts. And that's the justice of economy. And people claim that, there's, some kind of divine light economy or love economy or resource-based economy where, we don't have any debt. It's just a total abandonment of principles. So I'm sorry, but I've explained this so many times. I don't know why you people, my question to you, we've been waiting for questions, but my question to the audience is, why aren't you standing up against Roger? Why aren't you saying, hey, you can't do that. You're not solving the problem. We already have a solution. If you were doing this all your life, where have you been until now? And why, when you say in your own presentations, and I have this recorded, I listened to it this morning, it's fresh in my memory, Roger's claiming that this right to create, this authority to create money belongs in the hands of government. And these people aren't even challenging him on creating a private bank which complies with no laws whatsoever, and he has no authority even to do this. Okay? So how come you're not challenging Roger is my question. You there, Ivan?
I'm still here, yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty much sums that up, doesn't it? With regards to the lawful bank, and just on that point about the sheriff, and you know, I told you before that I mentioned in the chat box as well that if our arguments are that there is no debt and we can just walk away from it, well, if you think what's going to happen further down the road if all of us will start doing it. First of all, you know, other people will be facing whatever we abandon. That's first thing, you know. And the second thing is it's like an accounting fraud, you know, because if you're aware that even if you don't really understand this, but you are aware that something that you agreed to, you're now abandoning, and you know, I've mentioned in the chat box that it doesn't take much to figure this out. So I mean, you can, you know, you can easily think that whoever is checking TNS, and I mean by you know, the current administration, I don't think it's going to take much time for them to figure this out. You know, how they're going to approach this whole situation with people who are walking away from the debt. You know, so we can't really prevail in this argument because. It's really like if you're just looking from common law perspective, it's actually criminal. So I mean, we talk a lot about here, you know, in TNS about don't incriminate yourself. You know, don't say, you know, oh, are you the name or you're not the name? But that's not that's not really important if you incriminate yourself by committing a fraud. You know,
and that fraud is absolutely attached to you because you admitted you're this person, you did sign the paper, you have incurred the debt, and you are now trying to defraud the courts. I've been doing this for 44 years, and each of these people that were in that video have already been contacted by several people about mathematically perfected economy. And no one, I guarantee you, I haven't even heard from all these people yet, but I guarantee you that no one has received an argument that there's no debt other than what some people, even on TNS, are saying, that the money is created out of nothing or money is created out of thin air. It's not created out of thin air. It's created out of your signature to a contract to contribute, to pay, to contribute to the overall pool of wealth, the principal, which is as much as the real creditor, which is not the bank, gave up the house for your promissory obligation to contribute the equivalent of the house, so that in spending your promissory obligation, they could be rewarded duly. If you don't contribute that to the overall pool of wealth, there isn't enough wealth for all the real creditors, which is us, by the way. It's not the banks. It's us. When we accept money, that's being a promise to pay a like value as we gave up for that money is what guarantees us our reward. Rectified money is our protection. It's justice. And if we don't uphold our end of the bargain, the value of any money just goes away. We cannot sustain our commerce on a static circulation or relatively static circulation of how much gold exists, or silver and gold in combination, or that's not enough, so let's make platinum at two. And so instead of using these three metals for whatever else we might desire to use them, they have to be dormant in money and in a circulation which isn't even nearly enough to represent all of our contributions to prosperity so that we can be rewarded for these things, you see, for our contributions. We can't even perform the work because there isn't enough representation for reward to perform the work. And this is what I meant to illustrate over and over again by my example of, 1,000, 100, whatever, however many people organized in a circle, and over every period of time, they do so much work. Each of them have $10 or 10 pounds or yen or whatever. And at every period of time, they turn to the person to their left and hand them their $10 for that person's work. So the person on your right has given you their $10 for your $10 worth of work. And across the whole circle, because there's enough to represent the value of all the work that exists there, all things can be exchanged simultaneously. Now, if we go around that circle and at every 5th person or 10th person or whatever, take away 5 pounds, all right? What happens when we try to perform that same transaction? It dies at the first person that's been deprived 5 pounds that we encounter. Now, for it to continue beyond that point in this circle, that person has to go and earn the $5 or pounds that they had but have been deprived of. Again, they have to earn doubly, okay, to perform the function that they should have just been able to perform. That is, if we're deprived of circulation that was already existed. If we're deprived of creating it, then they can't even have the $10 to perform the prior the transaction and every prior transaction. And if it comes out to 50 cents per person, that's all the work that we can do in exchange at the same time. So it's very, very important, the volume of money in circulation. If you deny one person representation for their work, you impose injustice upon that person. And there's no reason ever to do that, because mathematically perfected economy solves that situation. Any and every time that further representation is needed, the person who needs it is the one who would issue the promissory obligation. So the people are the true issuers of money, even under this system. The problem is that we're being exploited by banks inserting themselves in the equation and pretending that they're loaning us money, when in fact they're just publishing a further representation of our promissory obligations. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but that's just trivially obvious. It's overtly obvious. It's indisputable. It's a fact. You ask the bank won't provide an answer. You ask the Bank of England, if you've studied our Freedom of Information Act inquiry against the Bank of England claimed that there was no answer, that it was an unintelligible question, on and on, until finally they claimed that it would be too expensive to answer the question. And that was their final reason for evasion. Too expensive to answer the question. They could devote so many hours toward it at such and such a price, and with a limit of so many 1,400 pounds a time or something like that they could devote at it. It's a huge lie still. Why? Because if banking, the truth about banking, was ever once justified in history, that answer already exists. Not only does it already exist, if it wasn't imposed upon unassenting countries everywhere in the world, not only would the answer already exist, every one of us would know that answer. And the answer is that because the bank won't even pretend that it gave up lawful consideration equal to the value of money it's pretending to loan to you, therefore no debt exists to the bank. And the bank is just inserting itself in the equation, publishing further representations of our promissory obligations, which at negligible cost it creates and then pretends to loan to us, laundering the principal into their possession, and then multiplying that into a terminal sum of debt by imposing interest, which forces us to maintain a vital circulation, because out of the principal, the circulation, we're paying principal and interest. We can't even persist in the initial debts of such a system unless we borrow the interest and principal that we pay out of circulation back into circulation. So we're paying principal out, borrowing it back as new debt, making it mathematically impossible to pay down any prior sum of debt, and we're paying interest out of the circulation, borrowing that back as new debt, thus increasing the sum of falsified indebtedness to the banking system by so much as ever greater sums of periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt, falsified debt, until at an inherently escalating rate we suffer the present terminal failure, which is why these people can't pay their mortgages anymore. And why what they really need to discover is not that they don't owe a debt, because they do owe a debt. They owe at least the principal, and they owe that to the real creditor, not to the bank. The bank could be the entity which retires it from circulation when it's paid. We could delegate that responsibility to a private entity. I wouldn't advocate doing that, but I'm saying it could be done that way, and it could be done legitimately that way. If it faithfully performs that obligation instead of laundering it into its possession, which is something we'd certainly want to, impose some checks and balances on. But the right place for this is government, which is why, again, Roger Hayes shouldn't be creating a private bank if he understood these issues. Roger said so himself.
Yeah. And what I want to mention as well, Mike? There's a lot of people talking about how the control grid and how we all kind of been everybody being brainwashed. But here's what I want to say about that. We here, everybody on TNS, we obviously are aware of this grid. And it's easy to see how, how the fact that the money is being, how the monetary system is set up at the moment, that everything is affected by it. So everything is affected by money, so we know that resolving this thing is important. So even if you just take all the people that we have here in, the so-called truther movement, we essentially running around telling each other, there's all this control grid, yet we know that we need to resolve it, and
so we're submitting to it when each of us, particularly people like Roger Hayes, and I'm talking to you, Roger, when people like Roger Hayes take solution, steal it from somebody else, which is an issue, pretend all this authority justifies creation of a private bank when in his own presentations, which advocate that the place should be government. This is how phony and hypocritical all of this is. But when we all just splinter off 1,000 different directions, claiming money is created out of nothing, money can't be a debt, money has to be gifted into circulation, the interest has to be created and spent into circulation with the principal, all these phony people that have taken solution and compromised it into something else have only divided us. And the very fact, that we need to have these discussions if we're ever going to resolve all these issues, and that more issues crop up every day than we can possibly resolve, is really the people's fault. We're not standing for sovereignty if we're claiming we're controlled by chemicals they're putting in. I drink water. If there's fluoride in my water, I'm drinking water. There's chlorine in my water, I'm drinking chlorine. I filter my water. But what is the solution? This is something that, it's all the same at the end of the day, Roger said. Paying for a house over 25 years is the same as paying for it over its lifespan. I mean, I use 100 years as, an example that makes the math easy, which is relatively realistic. But if we did this under mathematically perfected economy, we might build houses that last 200 or 300 years, and to just ignore the fact that, the math is way different over 25 years as opposed to a 100-year lifespan, and claim it's all the same because he's eradicated interest because it doesn't exist. I mean, sorry, this is so stupid. And if we're grown up people, supposedly, put those two words, grown up, in double quotes, but if we think that we're going to prevail in courts of law, where a judge should be of pretty much impeccable intellect, and we think we're just going to assert that money's created out of nothing and we're going to prevail, or we're going to assert that there's no debt because money is created out of nothing, or we're going to assert that there's no debt despite the fact that we signed a contract assuming a debt, etc., 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 and we're going to prevail somehow, when in fact we are gypping ourselves, the real creditors who gave up production for money, are compromising ourselves because we're denying ourselves the wealth that we need to collect with that money if our contribution to the pool of wealth is justified. And we think we're going to prevail for all this? I mean, for crying out loud, that's to say that your 15 seconds of good thinking somehow redefine economics as this thing where we'd sign a contract or we'd issue a promissory obligation and never fulfill it and everything would be fine. Or we just dispense with money altogether and somehow we just occupy the house and the people would just build houses for us regardless of whether or not they would get from us an equal to what they contributed to us, and somehow that would just happen in any world despite the fact of money and despite the fact that only a right money, the currency of mathematically perfected economy, preserves our entitlement to the pool of wealth. Now, people can say, well, I'm so spiritually evolved, I call myself divine light, and I would just contribute, I would just go on producing and people would just give me materials to produce and people would take my production and I would take other people's production as I saw fit, Well, we'd find out very quickly, as we always have under communism and socialism and capitalism as well. Capitalism is mutually exclusive to mathematically perfected economy. It's another way of defrauding people out of their possession, their rights, their entitlement. So through a banking system, purported banking system. It's not a banking system at all. They're the modern money changers. And, so if you're more spiritual and we don't need money, when Scripture said, that the love of money is the root of all evil, and you're going around saying money is the root of all evil, and the only money that you know and don't even understand but claim to understand yourself is the purported money of the very money changers, claiming that money is wrong because it was purposely manipulated into a device of dispossession, terminal dispossession, by purported bankers who are just modern day money changers. You're the problem. You're the problem. And then these people, want to, undo all the work we've done here for a year on TNS hit me in the back of the head when I'm not looking or something, and there's some pretty nasty things that are going on about this in the back rooms here at TNS and everything, come out of the woodwork and debate this, prove that your concept of, there's no such thing as a just money, prove that money doesn't protect the people's entitlement to each other's production. Prove that it would just work. And there's so many cases in history, I don't know why any kind of, reasonably responsible or diligent person wouldn't, conjure all these examples up and realizing, that's not going to work at all. I'm the electricity company, everybody's just going to continue to maintain it, despite the fact they might do something else. Everybody's not going to want the house of the best carpenters produce instead of the others, and so the others' production is going to go, unconsumed. These are the things that money can straighten out when and if, and only when and if you straighten out money. And when is money straightened out? When it represents our production and could be redeemed in our production and the production that we choose. And that means that I don't just claim that people are going to choose to consume my production. You know, if I build the best bamboo fly fishing rod in the world, yeah, a whole bunch of people would want to consume my production. A lot of them would have no appreciation for it, wouldn't even be able to fly cast or fish or whatever, and they would want them because they're beautiful or whatever. You know, and they might be willing to give me up their production. But I want people who appreciate my work to consume my work. And those other people that are building rods, you know, they're available and you can only get so many of mine. What's going to force people to consume these things? Oh, we just do all this somehow. You know, these same people, Peter Joseph and whatnot, they're claiming that, you know, people who didn't use money are the most prosperous in the world. Incas, for instance, they cite, you know, and you go and read these articles and they show that it was basically an early form of communism. And that the ruler decided how much possessions each family could have, and that was it. You didn't have any more prosperity than that. And it's in the same article that claimed that these people prospered like no other societies in history. You know, it's just a dream. So what allows us to prosper as much as we're capable of? A virtually unlimited supply of representation for work we intend to do, which ensures that we have reward commensurable to the work. No exploitation whatsoever. This is why free enterprise compels us. If I want a house, I build a house. Somebody doesn't come along and say, oh, Mike, I like the house you built. Thank you. I'll just occupy it. We're all sharing. We're all loving. We're all made of divine light. And this is my house now. Thank you, Mike. So what do? I go build another house. And as soon as I finish it, you know, somebody else comes along. Well, thank you, Mike. I'm another divine light being. You know, it doesn't work that way. You know, it's never worked that way. But the fact of the matter is we can resolve the issues of money. There are singular solution for each of the three categoric faults that I gave, which are inflation and deflation, circulatory inflation and deflation, systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, and inherent irreversible and therefore terminal multiplication of falsified indebtedness by interest. And that solution is simply a restoration of the universal right to issue unexploited promissory obligations subject to an obligatory schedule of payment retiring principal at the rate of consumption of the related property. Period. That's mathematically perfected economy. Invented 45 years before Roger pretended that people understand him better because he describes the problem of interest as being it doesn't exist. You know, if you all don't see through that, there's no point in me speaking to you. And actually, there's no point in Roger speaking to you either. Because if you think he made any sense at all, you have something very seriously wrong with you. You there, Ivan?
Yeah, I'm here. I just had to run out for a second.
Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to hear us or not. I'm pretty disappointed with the focus of TNS since I've come back, and I guess I don't know. What do you want to talk about? Have you been visited by any aliens lately, or you know? I had a giant rooster that lit up the sky last night, hovering over my house.
Really? Was
a giant rooster. Yeah.
Which planet was that from?
I don't know, but Roger Hayes was driving it, and I could see Roger up there.
Right. Yeah. I got a question from Pandit. Sorry, Pandit. I was just outside, so I haven't seen it. Let me just read through that. So. Right. Can you just post that? There's few questions there, Pandit. If you just post it again, or maybe in the chat box. But Pandit was asking about a few of the people he knows that are struggling to, well, we know what people are struggling with now. But basically, they've been taken to court. And what I want to ask, actually, until I get a reply from Pondi there, can people go ahead and argue MPE in court before the mandate is in place?
Sure they can. Sure they can, but, the whole damn reason, you watch. I really have 44 years in this mandate. You watch, and I really said, and that'll be the next thing that Roger Hayes will be doing, and 1,000 other websites as well. And each one of them will have to change it and make it sound like they invented it, and it'll all be different. And those differences, the reason I'm after the truth here is the truth's the only thing that can save us. The truth is the only thing that can save us. There's no deviation. These people who are claiming money can't be a debt still, they haven't even got their toe wet in monetary reform yet. I mean, Dave Ardren challenged Paul Greenone of Money is Dead about this. He came out with a new video. He took down his YouTube pages. Took him down. He wouldn't argue even with Dave. Dave called him out for plagiarizing my work. Said he's even got the wrong title of it. Dave understands all this perfectly. Argued all these arguments against Paul Greenone. Money is Dead. Doesn't even get it. Paul Greenone doesn't even get it. And go to his sites and look what he does. He's a damn artist who specializes in doing, videos which aren't even, very good. The material is totally false. It assumes that the result of interest being terminal debt is bad, makes all debt bad, when in fact you can't occupy that house that you haven't paid for unless you assume a debt to pay for it, because otherwise the person that gave up the house can't receive accordingly. That's justice. Argue justice, and you're not going to say it can't be debt. Investigate justice, and you're going to see, well, by God, that's the only thing that makes this justified. For crying out loud, how can money have any value any other way? How can we receive according to the fruit of our doings otherwise? What is justice? Is divine light saying, oh, money is the root of all evil? That isn't even the original saying. The love of money is the root of all evil, which implies a completely different thing. Not a problem with money, right money, which isn't necessarily defined, but a problem with loving money or lust for money, a need to increase wealth just for the sake of wealth, etc. Those kinds of things is what that saying is really addressing. It's not money itself. It doesn't say money is the root of all evil. And the person that keeps citing this in our TNS chat rooms, claims to be an expert in language and the origin of words, and they separate words into individual syllables and claim that that's the meaning of the word, as if that conflicts with your usage of it when you're using the dictionary meaning of it intentionally, because that's how we communicate. In other words, if that came from somewhere else, which doesn't even pertain to the present usage, meaning, etc., it's totally irrelevant. Because when I say justice, I mean by the modern definition, the present definition of the term justice. You see? And I don't mean that the courts have decided justice by some process which is unjust. I mean, I'm holding the courts accountable for justice. And so, I'm sorry, but to just, cry out that money is the root of all evil is just plain disgustingly inept and ignorant. Now, in terms of answering Pondi's question, sure, the arguments of mathematically perfected economy are the only thing that they're going to get away with. Because what's the facts here? You have a debt, okay? So now, what you really want to do in court is you want to sit, and the mandate is essential to this, because it's your actual arguments in court. Which I guarantee you, Roger Hayes, and if Roger finally throws in the towel on this, maybe he won't. But because we're on Roger's case here, because this awful bank, as people over there are telling me it has a name, is preposterous. And Roger is preposterous. He never figured this stuff out on himself. No one in history would ever say that the problem with interest is it isn't created. He denied he said it several times, and then when I asked him to explain it, that's the very answer that he gave. How stupid is stupid. I mean, sorry, if you're listening to that guy, you're wasting your time. So the answer is the answer. So here's how we deploy the answer. You have to go to court. What you want to do is I understand you did a show where you played one of my brief broadcasts where we summarized all these things again. That one program would probably be enough for a person to take the let's say the legal skills and the disposition of Ben Gilroy, which I admire, if and so long as it's a disposition to learn what arguments are the arguments for the case. Now, if you shot somebody, if you're a murderer, and you shot them, and you killed them, and you did this deliberately, no argument can save you. All right? Now, in the case of economy, we have such a situation as this. Economy is a lie. It's a purpose lie. It was imposed upon us despite public resistance everywhere in the world. It's never been justified, or the Bank of England would be able to say, oh yes, we gave up lawful consideration equal to the debt we claim is created when we merely publish further representations of your promissory obligations. They don't have that argument. And the reason is that they're trying to persist in a deception which you've just burrowed into the bottom of. Now, suppose that question is taken to court. I'm not saying suppose it is. I'm not saying this hypothetically. I'm saying it rhetorically. Obviously, that's a question which is pertinent here. Because if I loan Ivan a glass of water, which Ivan consumes, but that glass of water wasn't mine, I took it from somebody else and pretended only that it was borrowed from me, and that Ivan had to pay me 3 glasses of water in return, and I kept all of this, well, there's a problem. Because the accounting's not right. Okay? So, what's wrong with the accounting means that the debt isn't to the bank. The debt isn't to the bank, although the bank could be charged with the responsibility of retiring our payments from circulation. Therefore, we could pay the principal to the bank, but it's not owed to the bank. And when the bank receives our principal payments, it's to do one thing and one thing only with them, because the fulfilled principal, the paid principal, cancels the value from that money forever. Because it's fulfilled. It's evidence that we paid the principal of our debt to the real creditor. You've got a lot of feedback coming from your end there, Ivan. And so the principal is retired. It no longer represents value, and it's no longer the property of anyone. And that's the point of my Parable of Perfect Economy. So listen to my January 14th broadcast again. Okay, because and listen to the part about the 2 agricultural producers, how they issue promissory obligations. They circulate around the community, because each person that accepts then says, well, the grower of feed took my promissory obligation that I'd issued for so many thousands of chickens, and he wrote a promissory obligation against it, said, well, Mike Montagne is going to give you 25 chickens that you want for that shovel there, and that hoe and that axe, and so when it came time to collect those 25 chickens, the person holding that promissory obligation came to me and said, okay, I want my 25 chickens. I gave so-and-so grew the feed, Ivan there, I gave him an axe, a shovel, and a hoe for 25 chickens. I said, okay, fine, So you want your birds? They're out, they've beheaded all these birds out in the barn where they're out there right now, and go ahead and collect your ones out of that pile there. They're plucked and all ready to go. There's 25 birds out there. So what do? We take this promissory obligation, draw an X across it, write void across it, whatever. It's been fulfilled, and that person signs it, perhaps testifying that I fulfilled it. And so it's void. You don't get to collect another 25 chickens for it. It no longer represents value. Nobody could spend it around the community saying it still represented 25 chickens because the 25 chickens have been paid. So the fulfillment of the principle cancels it from existence. It's important to understand this so that we know that the debt is not to the bank. But then understanding the obfuscation of the currency, which we explain in court, which the mandate explains in such exacting and unequivocal and irrefutable legal language that you would actually present the mandate in court, citing the sections of the mandate, is proving that the debt wasn't to the bank, that its rightful resolution is to count all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, and to resume a schedule of payment equal to the rate of consumption of the related property. All these arguments are irrefutable arguments, are in the mandate. And you just are going to file a piece of paper with the court that cites those sections of the mandate, and you might also provide the court with a printed copy of the version of the mandate that you're citing. And this would have transpired in this foreclosure procedure that Ben Gilroy attended in the first time you went to court. In fact, I would be more preemptive about this. This is what we're advocating to do in the mandate. Is you sign the mandate, you print out our these additional forms, and you file one with the courts, with the district attorney, with the sheriff. All of them know before you're ever even foreclosed upon. You're keeping up with your payments. In fact, you're employed today. You're perfectly fine. Okay, you can list on an attorney, but you've been listening to this guy, Mike Montagne, and you see the math here, and you see that the system is going to fail, and you realize, hey, my company could go down tomorrow, if things hit the fan. So you realize all this. So you sign the mandate, and you issue all these forms to these different entities, including your bank. And you go down to your bank. So Pawnee would go down with one of these people that he's helping. He'd say, okay, here's one of these. They take this form, which cites the sections of the mandate, which prove that there is no debt to the banking system. However, there is a promissory obligation. I signed. The bank has no rightful claim to the principal. The principal never represented rightful property of the bank. Therefore, no property of the bank was ever at stake. Therefore, the bank has no right or authority to impose interest either. Therefore, all prior payments of interest should be applied instead toward principal. And if the bank claims a right to issue its irredeemable promissory obligations as lawful money, that being a private entity as Roger is proposing to create, they have no authority that can be denied any other private person, because we live under a society of equal rights and authorities. Therefore, I have a right. So on the one hand, I'm sitting right now before you, and I ask you what the balance is on my mortgage. And they say, well, I can't tell you. We've had people coming in here from people for Mathematically Perfected Economy giving us pieces of paper all day long. And I say, all right, fine. You deny me even the information, what my balance is? Fine. So you bend over with a pen and you scribble out on this piece of paper, we'll pay to the bearer on demand, infinity, And you sign it. You ask the loan officer to sign it. They refuse it. Pawnee's there with his camera. He's videoing this whole thing or recording it. And so you have a complete recording of the event that they either accepted or denied your fulfillment of their falsified debt by issuing a falsified fulfillment of like kind. You are issuing an irredeemable promise to pay. They issued an irredeemable promise to pay, a promise to pay that they made no provision to ever redeem themselves in anything of lawful consideration commensurable to the debt that they falsified. There is no debt to the bank. So if they're claiming a debt exists by the principles, it would exist. You have just paid the debt. Okay, so you've taken care of that, but this piece of paper likewise says that you're not claiming there isn't a promissory obligation. You're not claiming that that actually resolves your actual obligations. It only resolves your falsified obligations according to the arguments the bank itself is attempting to exercise. So you've handled it on those grounds. And the judge would have to consider that you have fulfilled the debt if the bank has such a right to issue money under the same conditions. Now, what you're also asserting in this piece of paper is that these arguments manifest in a fact of a remaining obligation, which would have a remaining balance after we apply all payments of interest instead toward principal, and then would have, if there is any remaining balance, the continuance of the rate of payment would resume at some point in time where which would correspond to the schedule of payment under mathematically perfected economy. Okay, so I explained that in actual words which pertain to it, but let's give the real life situation now. So this is, let's just say again, it's a $100,000 house with a 100-year lifespan, and under the present system, your mortgage payments have been $1,000 a month. Under mathematically perfected economy, they'd be $1,000 per year, 1/12 as much. All right, and this is general proportions that hold across practically any economy in the world. So, what your actual arguments are in court then are this restoration of the universal right to issue promissory obligations, and the mandate is not asking the court to honor this right as a hypothetical right. We are asserting our sovereignty, and Ivan's made this point very well. There is no such thing as unjust sovereign rights. If you can't justify the rights you're claiming, you are not asserting your sovereignty. You are attempting yourself to impose an injustice upon the rest of us, which is what you're doing if you're claiming there's no debt. But how would this shake out now under mathematically perfected economy? What it means is you have this $100,000 debt, and let's just say that you paid, let's give case one. In case one, you've only paid against this mortgage for 5 years. So you've paid $1,000 a month for 5 years. So that's $12,000 a year, or $60,000 you've paid toward a $100,000 home, and under this obfuscation of the currency, $999.50 of your first $1,000 payment went toward interest. Under the transition to mathematically perfected economy, which we can also view as a rectification of your promissory obligation, that would count instead toward principal. So here's your situation. Let's say you're a year in arrears after paying for 5 years, and you're in foreclosure, and you're getting the same visit that Mr. Ben Gilroy just attended. All right. Now you're saying instead of that he's, you might argue likewise that he's violating the Constitution on the more or less trivial grounds that were asserted there. But there's far more important grounds which transcend any constitution, because we have contract law which upholds these principles that because the bank never gave up lawful consideration commensurable to the debts which it therefore falsifies, the debts don't exist to the bank. That's just an agreement with all contract law, because each side have to give up commensurable lawful consideration. So, how does this resolve? You've paid for 5 years, you're a year in arrears, and you're in foreclosure, and you might be in bankruptcy too, very likely, both at the same time. So, where would you be under mathematically perfected economy? you would have paid that equates to 60 years. You paid $60,000 toward this debt. You haven't paid one house toward this house yet, and the obfuscation of the currency is going to make you pay whatever, 2, 3, 4 houses. You haven't even paid one yet. So you have many more houses to pay for this if you try and work things out under the present system. Can't do it. Why? Because you can only assume further debt beyond an already terminal sum of debt just to maintain a circulation to continue servicing this debt if you could. And the reason you can't is because terminal indebtedness made it impossible for you to do so. Why? It puts you out of a job. It made the cost of things that you depend upon too expensive for you. So the banking system imposed the artificial conditions on you that we can't sustain the prosperity that we're entirely capable of in all other ways. Only the obfuscation of the currency has put you out of business. So your payments equal 60 years of payments under mathematically perfected economy. Your balance would be $40,000 under mathematically perfected economy. And being as you've paid for 5 years, it's 55 further years into the future until you get to a point in time where you would resume your payments under mathematically perfected economy. So you wouldn't make another payment against this house for 55 years. And when you do, that payment is going to not be $1,000 a month. It's going to be 1/12 that, $83.33 a month. So 55 years down the road, you're going to resume payments of that house. So these are what the arguments of mathematically perfected economy restore monetary justice to, because this is what we have. We did assume a debt. It rightly belongs only being the principal. You got a gut ache when you signed that piece of paper because you knew you were paying 2, 3, 4 houses for one house. We're the people who produce all these things. We're the people who give these things up for promissory obligations. We're the real creditors then, because nobody else gives up anything, any commensurable thing for anything. It only costs $1 or $2 for the banks, even if they print physical forms of the money, to issue that $100,000 in existence. The debt isn't to them. The debt isn't to them. They don't deserve to be enriched to the extent of the principal. They deserve to be enriched to the extent of the cost of printing the principal plus whatever's a reasonable amount of profit on that, perhaps, which might be $1. So it should cost you $3 for the $100,000 in terms of what the banking systems have provided, and you should be paying $100,000 and $103, excuse me, off in the end. So now let's examine a case B. A person is paid 10 years toward this home. So they've paid $120,000 over 10 years against a $100,000 mortgage. It's paid off. So now you're a year in arrears after having paid 10 years toward this. You're in foreclosure. The bank's going to take the house away and expect somebody else to assume a debt for it and pay for the house many times over yet again, which is totally unjustified, of course. And yet, if we transition to mathematically perfected economy, you would have paid for that house plus $20,000 already. So, as I say, most of the world's debt, particularly since government debt, is multiplied and multiplied and multiplied by overspending and central banks purchasing, securities, so-called, which is a huge lie. It's just defrauding the public through government in the same way that it's defrauding the public in terms of all of its private affairs in order to dispossess us into terminal failure. So what would happen is the government of Greece, if they were advocating this against the European Union, they would say, well, hey, these people are just issuing paper, so here's your paper. All right? If that's legit to pretend to loan us money, then from another country, then there it is back. All you do is have publishers of paper printing up this money and claiming that the people owe this. And indeed, they would have owned the original principal to themselves, and the ones who should have paid it are whoever consumed the services or infrastructure of government. But because of this obfuscation of funding, now we have a like multiplication of government debt into terminal sums of insoluble debt. So no, the most those debts should be the original principal, and the people's debts then is all the interest or dividends that we count against it, which have been multiplied from the original principal. So that's what the rightful debt of every government ought to be. It's the same equation as we do in court. So what people want to do is they want to rely on those arguments of the mandate in court. So likewise, they have to sign the mandate, assert it as their sovereign rights. That means that, and I'm putting this in the signature form. You can't claim money's created out of thin air and claim these arguments too. You want to go with some of these other TNS broadcasters who are claiming that money's created out of thin air. Then, all right, fine, sign their mandate or join their bank or go to Roger Hayes and have him save you, and see how much the rest of us want to deal with the currency that you're pretending, to establish by like principles which you only stole and have created a private bank around it without any charter, because there's no way to create that bank lawfully. Even under present English law. Sorry, it doesn't exist. It's not going to happen either. So do it one way or the other. But the arguments are simple. You have the obfuscation of currency has imposed artificial conditions of terminal monetary failure around the world, making it impossible for us to sustain jobs and escalating costs of sustaining a standard of living, which has put us out of work, made us unable to meet our mortgage costs. Why? Because we assumed credit card debt, which ballooned is likewise, and made it impossible to service all our debt. And next thing you know, people are claiming our property from us, and the story just unfolds owing to the obfuscation of our currency. So the only thing that protects us is to restore rectitude to the currency, and that is by this transition to mathematically perfected economy, which we can perform or execute on a personal level by claiming sovereign rights to mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. Nobody's ever justified banking systems to society. No one. It's impossible. They don't give up any lawful consideration commensurable to the debts they falsify to themselves. Then they impose interest on it, which imposes this implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation by perpetually borrowing the interest and principal we pay out of our possession back into our possession, so we can simply persist in servicing the initial debts, which multiplies the initial debts by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt until we suffer the present terminal failure, which is why we have to go to court, which is why we have bankruptcy, which is why we have foreclosure. So the banks cause this by something which is unjustifiable. We're calling their number, and we are asserting those arguments in court. So that's what you're claiming in court. Also, I would go to the bank and I would claim to pay the debt to the bank, the falsified debt to the bank, not making it very, very clear. You're not claiming the debt doesn't exist. You're claiming if it consists of the matter and arguments that the banks are asserting it consists, then you've resolved the falsified debt. However, a remaining balance of principal may exist after all payments of interest are counted toward principal. And if it does exist, their only rightful schedule of payment is the rate of consumption of related property. So use the arguments to justify that, because if you pay more than that, you're paying for more than you consume, and if you pay less, then you're getting something for nothing. So only the rate of payment of that we consume of the property as we is what maintains a circulation, which maintains this perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation to pay just that much for the remaining value of represented property, which is the only thing that maintains an immutable currency, which therefore is the only thing that maintains the integrity of the contracts by which we have to issue currency. And why again is the promissory obligation the only reasonable vehicle? Because money has to retire from circulation in order to have that one-to-one-to-one relationship. And it has to retire at the rate of consumption of the related property. And only a promissory obligation does that. Gold doesn't do that, you know. And who should pay for that property? The very person who consumes of it. So all the relationships are right in a promissory obligation. The problem with the world today is only that we've allowed banks to exploit these by obfuscating our promissory obligations to each other into falsified debts to the banking system, laundering the principal into their possession, and then as if that was their possession and their rightful possession, and it was at risk, imposing interest, which multiplies the whole thing into a terminal sum of falsified indebtedness, which completes our dispossession in terminal failure, which is what's happening. When that sheriff goes to the home, that's what he's faced with. So this is why I'm saying that Ben Gilroy has to learn mathematically perfected economy. And God damn it, don't go off and pretend you're the savior of the world all of a sudden because you're going to create another lawful bank or some crap like that. You know, we have one argument, and if these people aren't faithful to it, don't even tell them about it. Let them go and argue there's no debt. Let them fall on their faces. Why? Because these people are discredit to us if other people think we're advocating the same thing. And this guy Ben Gilroy didn't come up with this idea that money can't be a debt. This is a falsehood that was promoted by this idiot Paul Greenone, who's just a plagiarist. He won't even talk to me on the phone. I've never had a discussion with him. You know, he doesn't want to have the discussion Roger Hayes didn't want to have because Roger's as phony as Paul Greenone is. And they're citing each other as if, you know, there's no debt. Freefromalldebt.com. Baloney, you're free from all debt. Or it's not our debt.com. Baloney, it's not our debt. Baloney. But what's the rightful debt? Yeah, we have to pay for a house because that's the only thing that gives each other what we've contributed to ourselves. You know? And so that's it. Money is just if it's unexploited promissory obligations subject to this obligatory schedule of payment, which is the only thing that means immutable value, which Roger doesn't get that principle either. We've only got 3 categoric faults, and he got everyone wrong and pretended to invented them himself and arrived at the same answers, and they're not even the same answers, except he's eradicated interest, doesn't even know why, and claims the reason is it doesn't exist. That's as stupid gets. And if you think you can follow that man into court and prevail, you're out of your damn mind, you know. And we need to divorce ourselves from you, you know. If TNS hosts are going to argue something else, debate it with us. Prove there's another way to have a just money, or prove that just all money is unjust, when this is the only thing that represents our entitlement to the overall pool of wealth, as we've each agreed, or we wouldn't have paid you the money that you have, you know?
Yeah, it's like those people, you know, when you have an accounting system and they say, oh, you know, don't worry about it, that's okay. You know, that's the accounting system, what keeps it, you know, what keeps it right, what keeps track of what the other one person made and who somebody promised, you know, and that's how you can see straight away out of the gate if somebody argues against it. It's like, something stinks here, you know? Why would somebody
yeah, a lot
it?
stinks when you're saying things behind the scenes and you call yourself something or other of divine light and you're advocating a spiritual economy and you can read every paper in the world about it and there isn't a principle about it that establishes justice at all. And if spirituality isn't about justice, what is it?
Yep. So I think we need to an important thing to do is and this is what, you know, I think everybody should be doing, is get this idea out of our heads that there's somebody that is in control of everything. There's this conspiracy, or there's this group of people.
In truth,
so
Ivan,
helpless,
you've said that very well, and I like to hear it when you say it. But what you're trying to explain to people, and I don't know. I think it's stupid that we're trying to communicate with people that claim they can't understand this, because frankly, day in and day out, the reason I wasn't able to prepare a show today is I got contacted by a woman who wanted to do promotional material on this and interview me and so on and so forth. And we had just a fabulous visit. We had never spoken before. She went on my website some time ago, 2 or 3 months ago. I don't even attend my YouTube accounts because that whole thing is all, it's just, YouTube is a mess. The most evil, wicked people in the world, love to hang out and mess YouTube up. But anyway, she understood it perfectly well. I hear from people all day long, every day, who hear from it perfectly well. I spend most of my time attending to a few people who maybe read a tiny part of it, claimed it was too verbose, or some damn thing like that. I mean, just something that flew into my head. But yet, my parable of perfect economy is more information than exists in all the combined books of, Stephen Zarling, of Bill Stills, Ellen Hodgson Brown, who only plagiarized my work because they read my parable of perfect economy, thinking that Benjamin Franklin was Benjamin Franklin when it's me. That my words are spoken through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin in that story. And all these people are against usury, who ever since, who never were against you. This didn't exist before, and these people claim to have arrived at the same, conclusions themselves, and they can't even explain how or what the process is to get there from here. Roger didn't figure this out. I mean, I got him saying that money as a debt is a problem. Within the last year, all this is as phony as you get. People don't have to get this out of their heads. What they have to do is they have to call Roger out. If you understand this, why aren't you calling Roger out, or why are you listening to him? Attending his pretentious, get-togethers that, if you understand this, because it's not. He's not advocating solution. He's certainly not the author of it. And another private bank that's rules and principles are going to be decided by 100 people for some reason. 100 people for some reason. 100 people for some reason. Why not 123? It's just, I can't believe that I've been doing this for 44 years, and that's what I'm up against. 100 people. Now, if you as I asked Roger the other day, if you have the principles, why aren't the principles going to decide it? And what room is there at all for management then? Mathematically perfected economy is just principles. And we get to decide how we want to deploy them through the common monetary infrastructure. If you want to decide on some rate of depreciation or consumption applies to a certain class of house construction, that's exactly what you're supposed to do under mathematically perfected economy. But you decide about it, not some arbitrary 100 people that Roger handpicks or rise to that stature by some process we don't even know. If Roger wanted the answer, why hasn't he employed me? Right? I haven't proven that there's one and one only solution for inflation and deflation, one and one only immutable currency, one and one only solution for systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. And he adopted my eradication of interest, so he certainly doesn't disagree with that, even if he doesn't have the slightest idea how you would establish or prove it, So what's Roger? And why has he avoided me? Because he wants to pretend that he authored all this stuff in the last couple of years. 40 some odd years after a 16-year-old kid did, and he can't even explain it yet. Yeah, the problem with interest is it doesn't exist. My God, how would that stand up in a court? What does it even mean? It means you have a blithering idiot who can't even articulate the problem and is claiming that people understand him better than me. You can't understand anything if it isn't explained for what it is. And the problem with interest isn't that it doesn't exist.
Yeah. So I think that I think actually that's part of being responsible. Stop saying that there's this cabal, there's this greed that controls you. I mean, if you know about the greed, how it can control you, So you're saying it doesn't control you, it controls other people. But I go around and speak with people about MPE, and they get it. And there's sure enough, some of them watch X Factor, and some of them, do things that are kind of brainwashing, But people get it. Well, I think it's just in people's heads that they like to think there's this cabal and we're all struggling, and we need to overcome. But it's all bullshit,
It's absolutely bullshit. These people. The bankers, are deathly afraid of us understanding. We are the control grid. If we take the explanation for the problem, there aren't two explanations for the problem. There's one obfuscation of the currency, and there is one correct way to describe it, and there is one way that will stand up in court because it is the only truth. Period. So we're the control grid. We submit to our own control grid when we say, oh, it's because the interest doesn't exist. Oh, I understand Roger Hayes because interest doesn't exist. I get it. You get it, my butt. Explain what the problem is that interest doesn't exist. Speechless audience. Anyone who even attempts to answer that question is a fool, because it isn't that interest doesn't exist. And anyone who thinks that somebody came to the same conclusion and then would explain it as interest doesn't exist is a fool of fools. Excuse me. Divine light, my butt. Money is the root of all evil. My butt. We're the root of all evil because we take the truth and immediately turn it around into some profit-making scheme or glorification of some imposter who doesn't even understand the issues we solved a long time ago. And I don't know how many years we're going to do that, but I know this, that people are going to sign this mandate and the rest of you can do whatever you want. I mean, I don't know what the point is of helping people or even trying to help people who A, can't help themselves, B, because they can't help themselves, have some idea that there's multiple solutions to any mathematical riddle, or that anything we say is the problem. So we have people that think that we abandon the gold standard is the problem, that fractional reserve banking is the problem, that Kennedy's executive order wasn't honored is the problem, that Lincoln was assassinated was the problem. It goes on and on and on and on. And what is happening in every case is whoever's saying that, or even thinking of it, or is even tempted to think that, is just submitted to the control grid. They haven't said, oh, okay, well, wait a minute. This jerk, arrogant guy from America is claiming that money is all promissory obligations. I'm going to have a beer and watch X Factor. Or I listened to this divine light being who said money's created out of thin air. Another unoriginal idea comes from Ron Paul. Money is created out of thin air, and he claims, that many Austrian economists predicted the present failure, yet they're all advocates of interest. And I know which ones predicted the failure, and they did it. Each of them is a blatant plagiarist of my work. A blatant plagiarist of my work. And they didn't predict it themselves. They borrowed my prediction. And they took my same articles like interest is usury and converted them, even preserving their titles. It's about interest is usury, and the whole gist of the paper is that any rate of interest that you have to borrow into circulation above principal to maintain a vital circulation perpetually increases the sum of falsified debt until you suffer a terminal sum of debt. So it inherently engenders inherently usurious sums of debt, regardless of the rate of interest. 0.000125% interest, so long as it has to be borrowed into circulation to maintain a vital circulation. Perpetually increases the sum of debt until you suffer terminal failure. Might be 1,000 years off, but it's still the same crime, just committed over a longer time span. Still imposes terminal dispossession on all of us. Interest is usury. Borrowed my very articles with that title to advocate gold would solve it with no argument whatsoever of how. And borrowed that from a body of work which proves one solution to inflation and deflation, and that is representation for all contributions to production, which is impossible under a gold or silver or platinum or precious metal or any other monetary standard. And what is fractional reserve banking? Is it the cause of our problems? No, it's a consequence of the faults of the gold standard, because you can't have enough circulation to sustain vast more industry someday on virtually the same circulation or little more, negligibly more circulation far down the road, And so you abandon it. And that's that. And interest might cause you to abandon that all the earlier because it's multiplying debt in relation to a circulation, and you have to introduce a whole load more circulation. Why? Not because that it's increasing the circulation, because it's replenishing the ever more that you're paying out. This is what's so preposterous about, these people who claim money out of thin air, They don't even know where it originates. It originates in Ron Paul. But why? Because he's claiming that he's implying that the causes of our problem is that money's too cheap. That's why we're borrowing too much. He advocates, and Austrian economists advocate, elevated rates of interest. And even began to study this if you don't realize these things. So he's saying if we made money more expensive by increasing interest rates substantially, we wouldn't have borrowed too much. And he's claiming, in the same saying, that too much money is the cause of our problems, right? And what does he cite? He cites how much money the Federal Reserve is creating. Okay? Is that the equation for too much money? Is circulatory inflation? It's an increase in circulation per represented properties, all right, or entitlement. Okay, so it is an increase in circulation per represented properties or entitlement. Okay, but if you increase circulation, is it just what you create and introduce to circulation that manifests in an increase? Absolutely not, because the rest of the math is you're paying out of your possession all the interest and principal on the monumental sum of debt you've accumulated by paying interest and principal out of circulation and borrow that back into circulation as a new debt increased perpetually by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt. You see? So Ron Paul isn't even doing the math. And he claims by this stupid phrase, money out of thin air. It's utterly stupid. Money is not created out of thin air. And he's saying that just creating it and increasing the circulation. So our problems are a result of inflation. He says this all the time. And that's what the phrase or expression relates to. Okay? But if it was true, we'd be awash in money. And that's why prices would have gone up. And as I told you about, there's the first question I asked about economics, and it precipitates in this whole thesis of mathematically perfected economy in a two-part rhetorical question where, first of all, I prove that circulatory inflation is impossible because debts are collateralized. So I asked my teacher, so how is it even possible to suffer circulatory inflation? He thought for a full 2 minutes. Standing there, rubbing his head, talking to a kid that had been in college algebra since the second grade. And he finally says, by God, I think you're right. And then I said, well, being as the money comes into circulation as a debt subject to interest, then this would comprise this implicit obligation, which I keep explaining, that we pay that in order to maintain a vital circulation, we have to reborrow the principal and interest that we pay out of our possession back into circulation as a new debt, increased by so much as periodic interest, until we suffer a terminal sum of debt which destroys creditworthiness to borrow further to maintain a vital circulation, and the circulation would deflate in the final stages of the present catastrophe. Meanwhile, all the while, ever more of the circulation is dedicated to servicing debt as opposed to sustaining the industry and commerce which are obligated to do so. Thus, maldisposition, or multiplication of falsified indebtedness in proportion to the circulation, is the cause of increasing prices, because it imposes increasing costs on industry and commerce, forcing industry to increase its prices to maintain necessary margins of solubility. Therefore, interest is the cause of not only of terminal monetary failure, but of perpetual price inflation. And I'm the one who came up with the separate terms long time ago for circulatory inflation, which was the original meaning. And it was assumed, as my teacher had just attempted to teach, that price inflation was the consequence of circulatory inflation, which we had just demonstrated, so long as debts are collateralized, cannot even exist. And yet this is what Ron Paul is trying to sell to all these simpletons who want to say, oh yeah, money's being created out of thin air, and that's the reason that the value of money has gone down. Not at all. It's interest. And Austrian economists are not only advocates of interest, but advocates of elevated rates of interest purportedly to discourage us from borrowing. But what is the fact then? The higher the rate of interest, the more interest you have to borrow back into circulation to maintain a vital circulation. Thus, the faster the escalation of debt and the faster the failure. So he's pretending that Austrian economists, who he won't name because they're my plagiarists, and I can name them, and I have named them. I need to go on that again, but, all this is preposterous. So anybody wants to claim money's created out of thin air, debate us. Anybody wants to claim there's another solution, including Roger Hayes' bank, debate us. There's people at TNS and around TNS who tried to get Roger and Hayes and I together for a year. In fact, I have an earlier discussion with Roger Hayes. He doesn't understand a damn thing about any of this, and this lawful bank thing is a lost cause anyway. He's only pretending to come up with a solution that, he's morphed more and more into the only solution, and he's still, substantially shy of it, and his bank is not the way to do it. Period. A private bank is not the way to do it. So all these people can hee-haw that they're getting away with murder, and Roger's the new savior, monetary savior, because interest doesn't exist, and their bank's going to do it for all of us, and they're going to solve all our problems. Well, sorry, the private bank is not the way to do it. I even listened to Roger's minute and a half or 45-second part of a presentation where he himself asserted that government is the only place that money should be created. So all this is just preposterous. And if you go on saying these things, then I don't know, debate us, or I don't know, maybe we should go away because we got new TNS hosts who, are promoting the idea that money's created out of thin air, and money is the root of all evil. If I'm not part of that movement, and if spaceships are our focus and multiple incessant alien abductions are my claim to fame, then I discredit myself, and if you people aren't interested in solution, that's all right with me. I know a lot of people who are, and there's no room for the opposing sides of this here. So people are losing their houses. If Divine Light is interested in defending their position, fine. Let's meet. Let's do this. I'm tired of the incredible things that have been said behind the scenes. I mean, I mentioned some things that happened to, a number of people the other day because, they're just absolutely unacceptable in any kind of cooperative circle of people who are working toward the same goals, which are ostensibly a TNS solution. Either we're about solution or we're not. I'll debate anybody here, and everybody here. Free for all, yell out, scream out. I don't give a damn what it is. Let's just do it. Vin can get on the mixing board and let's take all these people, down, or they take me down, whichever it is. I don't care. And if you want me out of here, I'll leave. You all want to go to court claiming that you don't have a debt. Fine. That's what Ireland can do. That's fine with me. It is fine with me, especially after I spent all the time here that I have, and people are claiming they don't understand this. It's been explained inside out, upside down, and backwards, so many times now. No one has any excuse. No one.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I would debate anybody who is prepared to have a discussion or he thinks he can invalidate MPE and many other people as well. So the problem is nobody debate, right? Nobody debates.
Oh,
they're just trying to poke holes in the in the whole thing, and nobody would actually sit down and debate.
Yeah, well, that's okay too. I mean, it would have been better if we already had a mixing board the other night, so that whoever was interrupting couldn't have interrupted until the other person was finished. That's the only way to control it. So I only advocate that Vin or somebody deal with it with a mixing board so that the audience, doesn't have to, endure breach of argumentative principles. But it's okay if they don't have an argument and they just want to make claims. Money is evil. Fine. Make the claim then. If that's all the argument, then that's all the argument the audience has. I frankly, I've heard enough about mathematically perfected economy. If I'm the audience, I don't even want to hear any of these other people. I wouldn't even want to listen to TNS ever again if I got to listen to alien abductions where the guy's got a few comments about monetary reform somehow. What a strange admixture of interests, or if there's some, spiritual, enlightenment that, that amounts to a fact that money is evil, it's as if saying a contract is evil or a commitment is evil, because all money is a commitment and a contract, period, unless you allow bankers to change it. Money changers are evil. People that claim things that aren't solution are evil, especially when we need solution, and 10,000 homes in just the United States are going into foreclosure every day. Those people are evil. People who claim to have ascertained the problem when they can't even articulate it and know damn well they stole it from somebody else, they're evil. Why? Because you should be listening to the person that did ascertain it and did develop a solution out of it. And if that's not what you're interested in listening to, then you think I'm pretending, or it doesn't matter that I solve these things and that anybody can come up with a solution. And yet, all you see in history is Stephen Zarlinga advocated a Chicago plan with interest rates reduced to 4 or 5%. That would have saved us. They're far below that now, and we're still not saved. Why? Because any rate of interest is usury. Interest is usury. That's why. Because it's an obfuscation of the currency. Because banking shouldn't exist. Allen Hodgson Brown advocated that what Roger repeated, that the interest doesn't exist. Therefore, it needs to be spent out into circulation with the principal. Why? When you can't even justify interest, because it's only imposed because the bank falsifies that it has property at risk. And that multiplies falsified indebtedness into terminal indebtedness. So you're just saying, oh yeah, still it's justified to pay 2, 3, 4 houses in interest on top of the principal if we just spend it into circulation with the principal. That's as stupid gets. That is utterly stupid. It proves the woman is nothing but a plagiarist, especially since she plagiarized my Parable of Perfect Economy. It's obvious where she even got these ideas. And she had to change them into something else because she's a lawyer and she knows full well she's plagiarizing me. That's why she changed them. I was notified a few days ago about yet another guy who's writing a book with my ideas, who interviewed me. Well, what the hell's going on here? He was arguing against me the whole while. He finally sort of got it after a whole bunch of other people said, hey, the guy Mike Montagne knows what he's talking about. Don't you get it? He finally got it. So he produced a book in a few weeks, and now he's another authority. I don't think so. I don't think so, because there's a lot of other things to answer for in terms of implementation. And I mean, there's a heck of a lot of questions that have been resolved to absolute answers all along the way. Nobody's going to just jump in here and pretend to, eradicate interest and assimilate my schedule of payment and solve the same thing. Roger can't even tell you why there's 3 categoric faults to be solved. And those 2 things are the result of it. He can't tell you why. And he's never explained it to anybody. And his audience supposedly understands. What a bunch of crap. And here we are spending time about this, and I mean, it's all there is to talk about, because we've gone around and around and around and around in circles. And still, all that happens is another TNS host jumps up and says, money's created out of thin air. I don't have a debt. I'm free.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, people who are willing to try that and go with that, they will try that, and they would see, in the end, and it will not work. I mean, it's really that simple.
Yeah.
So there's no. Eventually, people will
name
realize
one case it has worked. There you go.
Yeah.
People have been doing this for years. Name one case it has worked. Name one court case where indeed it was decided, despite the fact that a person signed a contract to assume a debt, that no debt existed. Name one case. Come on, wake up. It's been happening forever. And these people are arguing now that there's no debt. They haven't even woke up yet. They haven't even got enough sleep. That's just stupid. It's blitheringly stupid. I mean, that isn't our audience. I know there's good people out there that understand this. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
In the last few weeks, in fact, I have got so many emails from other people who've listened to TNS and who don't listen to TNS anymore. They're sick of what they're hearing now. I have so many people who tell me they only listen to TNS when I was on, and they quit listening to it after that, and now they've gone back. And I mean, there's things going on at TNS, and I hear about it from all parts of the world immediately. I don't listen to this stuff. I don't follow these people. And there's some really ugly stuff going on between particular people, and they know who they are. And they know we recognize their, methods of operation. We know what they're saying in the chat rooms, and if the people who are listening to these people knew these people for what they're really about, what they're saying, how they work, I mean, if you want to hear them, I'm glad to butt out, because I don't like the idea of wasting my time with people. And we worked hard at explaining this to people, and can't master it, don't want to master it, need Pawnee to master it for you. Shame on you.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
It's not solving. That's not being responsible.
Right. If you didn't, I got a notebook right now. I always got a piece of paper. I always got a piece of pen. If I need to write something down real quick, it's going to happen. And if I was listening to a radio program where this guy just outlined, I mean, I'm tired. Yeah, I'm really, there's no way I'm ever going to give up the battle. But if people like some people at TNS who I've been confronted with lately are indicative of the audience that we have to listen, then we're attempting to educate people who would just as soon cop out and say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, therefore money is evil, which isn't even what Scripture says. or yeah, money is created out of thin air. Sure, I'll just glom onto that, and that'll be my slogan for the rest of my life too. Sorry, those people don't know anything. They can't be educated. If you want that, you already have it, and you also already have what I've had to give. So, this has taken time. I'm wondering why I do this. I don't want to be associated with many of the preposterous things that go on. I mean, like I said the other day, a woman accosts me that my YouTube videos are created by some actor because of a TNS program. The actor's doubling as a police agent, and I assured her it was really my video, and it was like the response was, "Really? Are you sure?" I was like, "It's my own goddamn video." And if that's what kind of people are listening to TNS, we would really have the wrong audience. And you were complaining about people not understanding this. I'm sorry, that's the exception. If you go to a Ron Paul forum, it isn't that people don't understand this. It's that they're viciously attempting to defend their candidate who's indefensible. He's never explained why or how money is created out of thin air, or why we really have circulatory inflation. It's impossible to have circulatory inflation if the debts are collateralized. But we don't have circulatory inflation unless your math is also accounting for what interest and principal we're paying out of circulation. Because what's left is a product of what's paid out plus what's borrowed back in. And the net is the sum. And we're actually suffering from a terribly deflated circulation. But Ron Paul forums are very adverse to argument because people do not want Ron Paul's ideas challenged. They just want that candidate to prevail because he's going to purportedly end the Fed. He's going to end the Fed. He's going to dissolve the integration of the 12 private banks at the top, which are the central bank, and spread the power to all banks. We'll still have the same thing. We'll still have the obfuscation of our promissory obligations, which is terminal. And if Ron Paul has his way, elevated rates of interest will discourage us from borrowing so much. So instead of paying 3 or 4 houses, you'll pay 5 or 6 or 7 for your house, and that'll discourage you from borrowing too much, all right? But it also multiply your debt at all the faster rate and impose terminal failure all the sooner. Watch my YouTube video. It articulates that step by step and step for the simpleton, and people claim they don't understand this, or there's some exception to it, and there's no exception to it at all. I mean, I did the math 35 years ago. I produced computer models 1983, 1984. They did the math, and they're amazingly accurate. They even projected how interest rates had to decrease over time. They smoothen it out, but it's still the pattern that we need to adhere to. But human decisions deviate and wait too long, or act too soon, and act too little, or act too much, and yet it all works out about the same. Because what happens is when you don't act enough or soon enough, more suffering precipitates in more severe reaction, and you get about the same result. It just zigzags across the line that my computers. And the idea that somebody would claim to me, after all the work that I've done, that money's created out of thin air, I mean, if you think about it, it's just ridiculous. I could react far differently.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to, how long do you want to stay on air?
Well, let's see, we got another, I'll get off any time, but we've got another 50 minutes until the next show. I guess Mally comes on after me. I don't even know.
It's 11 now. So
yeah, he comes on at 12, so it's 10
okay.
after 11.
I'm just gonna jump out here real quick, but I'll be back in, say, I don't know, 20 minutes.
Okay, give me something you'd like me to talk about. What's going on in the chat rooms I don't want to look at because of all the people giving me the one finger salute and all.
Yeah, well, I think the there are people in the chat room. It's a mixed mixed opinion in the chat room. Like some people, don't. You see, like I spoke with few of the people that leave in comments, so I know where some of them are at. So far, I see just people posting stuff that some of these people that don't really understand MP, to be honest. And I'm not trying to be against here anybody, folks, really. But I mean, there are people here in the chat box that are tuning in. There are people tuning in, not in the chat box, and people understand this. So, if you can't understand this,
that isn't the way that people who don't understand indicate how they don't understand. If the teachers in the teaching you elementary arithmetic, for example, and they explain how the sum of two numbers is arrived at, and how the sum of three numbers is arrived at, etc., which is just a glorified way of counting on your fingers, and you don't get it, you raise your hand and you say, what I don't get, Are people saying that they don't understand that inflation and deflation have to be solved? Are they saying they don't understand why we have to have an immutable currency? Are they saying they don't understand why we have to arrest terminal multiplication of falsified indebtedness? Or are they saying we don't have to have correct arguments for foreclosure against bankruptcy, which resolve our obligations to what we signed a piece of paper saying we would pay back the principal subject to interest? The interest part, you can leave and I'll just take it from there. I mean, I got to know what you need to explain. I've explained it all already. So what happened? Did I go too fast? After episode the other day in the TNS host chat room, one of the other broadcasters claimed, well, it was it's a genuine mistake that we make. It's not true. It is a genuine, it isn't just true in a blanket sense. Yes, we assumed a debt, and there's no genuine mistake about that. It doesn't matter if a person...
I'm going to have to jump off. I'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay. It doesn't matter if a person, assumes that, no matter even a demented state, when you sign a promissory note and you ask Grandma who's getting Alzheimer's, Grandma, you just refinanced your house. Are you aware that you just assumed another $50,000 of debt, the principal of this debt? And she'd say, oh, yes, go down to a bank and you ask every person who's signing a mortgage there, or refinancing their house, or assuming a debt for any purpose whatsoever, expanding business, whatever. You ask that person after they pen their name to a contract, are you under any misconception that you've assumed a debt? And I defy you to find anybody who doesn't understand that. So there's no question about that part. The question is, did we borrow the money from the bank when it just created a representation of our own promissory obligation? That's one question. Now, if it just created a representation of our promissory obligation, at most they have at risk is the cost of publishing it. Might be $1 to create $100,000. That's all they have at risk. So why are they charging you interest on $100,000? If interest is justified, why isn't it charged on the $1? And being as the real creditor who gave up property for the promissory obligation, who gave up that $100,000 house for a $100 promissory note, being as they're the only one who has property at risk because they're the only one who's going to suffer if we don't maintain the integrity of that promissory obligation by contributing to the pool of wealth $100,000 of our own production so that they can receive a like volume of our production from us in payment. Only then are we upholding our contract? But so, again, it's a promissory obligation, excuse me. It's a promissory obligation. And our payments are retired because we owe less and less and less when we pay it off. The money is just a portable accounting system. It's like actual physical tokens when it's physical money. And so it's our carrying around of that $100,000 with us when we're a creditor that is a testament to the fact that we gave $100,000 of property up, and we deserve now to receive $100,000 of property. This allows us to specialize and to increase our prosperity by virtue of a specialization. So regardless of whether you understand this idea that principal has to be retired, our real debt is to the real creditor, and the only way it's performed, I don't know how you can't understand this. Think about it. I build you a $100,000 house. You say, okay, Mike, I build bamboo fly fishing rods. I will produce $100,000 worth of bamboo fly rods. That might not be what you want, but because of other people contributing their production to the overall pool of wealth, you get to select what you want of it with $100,000, and I've only contributed my like contribution if I've contributed. So I receive $100,000, you receive $100,000 for the bamboo fly fishing rods that you build. How do you certify that you've produced this for me and not as a reward to yourself? You pay the $100,000 out of circulation. You sell a rod for $5,000. You pay $5,000 out of circulation. That went to me then because $5,000 of your production exists for me to reap as my reward for $5,000 of the $95,000 remaining that you owe. That $5,000 had to be retired from circulation because it no longer represents anything. You fulfilled the obligation to pay it off. It's just as in the parable of perfect economy. Simple thing to understand. Money is evidence that you're owed that much production. Period. That's all it is. Now, when a bank claims to loan it to you when they didn't even give up anything, that's a falsification. Period. It's as if I said, oh, you owe me $100,000 just because I give you a piece of paper that says I owe you owe me $100,000. That isn't what the piece of paper means because you issued a promissory obligation, which obligation precipitates to the real creditor who gave up property for it. It doesn't precipitate to the bank. The bank has no claim to fulfillment or enrichment. It gave up nothing. Period. It just created a further representation of the promissory obligation. So that's simple. How does this obfuscation multiply? I'd be bored to hear it. How can people say they don't understand this? What don't you understand? You don't understand promissory obligations? You don't understand that the bank's obfuscation of our promissory obligations multiplies falsified indebtedness into terminal sums of falsified indebtedness? It isn't because the interest doesn't exist. It does exist. It exists in the circulation. It's because the only way you can maintain the circulation, being as the bank can't purchase that much of our production, the production, related production that exists is only equal to the principal. It can't purchase the principal plus the interest in our production because the interest doesn't even exist in our production. Number one. It isn't something it wants to do either because then it's obvious that they're just publishing money and it's enriching them. And why? Let me publish the money. If you believe that's just or right, I wouldn't even want it, you know. Benjamin Franklin did that. He didn't collect the principal for himself. He didn't charge interest based on the principal for himself, you know. And besides, the story comes from my Parable of Perfect Economy and the Pennsylvania currency that Ellen Hodgson Brown praised as the most brilliant banking model in history. What didn't even exist. That's my story, my words, my explanation of mathematically perfected economy issued through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. I don't know. What don't people get? You think banking is justified still? You think we should all suffer terminal failure, foreclosure, bankruptcy, and we should go to the courts arguing we don't have a debt, even though we sign a piece of paper assuming a debt, even though the real creditor can only acquire from the pool of wealth if we contribute to the pool of wealth an equal volume of our own production? I mean, what don't people get? I mean, people claim they don't understand this. Well, I hear from a few people, most people I hear from, including a woman I had a just tremendous visit with this morning, you know. I understood it in vivid detail, extending out to just any implementation and everything. Didn't have to explain a thing to her. You know, we spent most of the time talking about the story behind it, you know, the history, you know, of it, and you know, she said she no sooner began to read my work and she realized it was the only answer, the only math that worked. What do other people tell you who get it? The exact same thing. Everybody who gets it says the same thing, and people claim they don't get it. Well, I don't know. What's the problem? What don't you get? What do I need to explain that hasn't been explained? Anybody saying there, Ivan?
I'm just back, Mike, answering the question to Ambassador. Yeah, it's, you know, it's just a standard question. Why, if you got a property of somebody and the bank created the notes, then they gave you the money to give to the creditor. So how come the bank is not the creditor? But this was explained many times before, and if you just
it's been explained many times today alone. The bank
doesn't
doesn't give up anything. The bank doesn't give up anything. You know.
So in other words, if you have three people, me, Mike, and yourself, Ambassador. And by the way, if you want to call in, I don't know, let me know, maybe in the chat box, and then I can PM you Mike's Skype, or if you have Mike on your Skype, or Mike, if you want to say the Skype. But basically, like, if we're three of us, right, and Mike is the one that actually printed the evidence. So you give me your bike, you know, I give you the money that Mike printed. So who is the actual creditor? Is it the bank, who just printed something that provides an evidence that you gave me your bike and you got the money? No, it's not the bank. I mean, that's
it's really simple. You know, but let me even say it in a more obvious way, which is the whole reason for my Parable of Perfect Economy, because it gives this example. Mm-hmm. Ivan buys a house that I produce, and Ivan builds whatever Ivan builds. Let's say Ivan raises chickens, and he says, Mike, I'll give you $100,000 worth of chickens for the house you want $100,000 for. So Ivan writes me a promissory obligation to deliver me $100,000 worth of chickens, which, by the value that we agree for his chickens, comes out to, let's just say it's $1 a chicken. So he's going to pay me 100,000 chickens over, let's not make it mathematically perfected economy. Let's just say it's over 10 years. So I'm going to get 100,000 chickens over 10 years, which is more than I can use. So I'm going to need to give them to somebody else if I accept chickens. But let's say I can use them for some reason. Let's just say that's the case. So Ivan issues me a promissory note to give me 100,000 chickens over 10 years. 10,000 chickens per year. So which is an awful lot, I realize, but we're just showing how a promissory obligation works. Yes, it's a lot.
I love chickens.
Yeah, I love chicken too. But can't eat that much.
You can never get too much chickens.
Okay, so here's the thing. So Ivan said, Mike, I'll give you 100,000 chickens, and I accepted that for some reason. That's exactly what I want. Okay? So how does this work then? Ivan gives me 10,000 chickens at the end of the first year, or the first day of the first year, or over the first year. Doesn't matter. But every time he gives me so many chickens, say he gives me 100 chickens, we subtract that from the 10,000 chicken that he owed because it isn't owed anymore, right? So we could keep the record right on that original note, and we'd say minus 10 chickens delivered at such and such a date, and I would sign it validating that indeed Ivan had provided me the 10 chickens or 100 chickens or 10,000 chickens or 1,000 chickens, whatever it is. Now the remaining principal is the original principal less what's been paid. So what happened to the promissory obligation? As it's paid, it no longer represented value, and it's retired from circulation because fulfillment voids its value. Simple as that. Do you get that, Ambassador? That's the situation. Ivan's issued the promissory obligation. It promises to give whatever to me. And as he pays it, it diminishes the balance and it diminishes the remaining value of the promissory obligation because all the payments are voided and retired from circulation. So that's the promissory arrangement between people, and that's the only way that money can represent true redeemable value likewise. Now, let's do banking. We have the exact same situation, except the bank comes in between Ivan and me and says, nah, Ivan, you cannot issue your promissory obligation to Mike on your paper. It has to be printed on our paper. So now, Ivan, you will pay the chickens to us, and Mike, you have the piece of paper, and because we loaned you money, the same promissory obligation, a further representation of it, the principal is at risk, and that justifies interest. So Ivan, instead of owing us 100,000 chickens, you owe us 500,000 chickens. And you have to pay us 500,000 chickens over 10 years. But there's only 100,000 chickens in circulation. So Ivan is going to have to borrow another 400,000 chickens over the lifespan of that obligation just in order to maintain the 100,000 chickens in circulation that he has to pay the bank 5 times over the same time span. Okay? All the bank did was give us the paper. So you're saying the chickens were owed the bank, is what you're saying, if the debt is to the bank. And it's not the case, because all the bank is doing is acting as a publisher of a further representation of our promissory obligation, pretending it's loaning us money. That's the first money that comes into existence. No money existed before. So all they did was deny Ivan and I our universal right to issue promissory obligations to each other, pretending that the only justifiable form, and rightful authority was that they issue a representation of the same promissory obligation, intervening between us, pretending to loan us money that never even existed to loan. They just created as it's needed, okay, which isn't creating it out of thin air or out of nothing. They created it out of our promissory obligation. They made Ivan go to the bank, sign a piece of paper and saying, "Oh, I'll pay Mike I'll pay 100,000 chickens to the bank for the 100,000 chickens I'm supposed to give to Mike." So the bank gives Mike a piece of paper representing 100,000 chickens and makes Ivan pay $500,000 to pay Mike, or 500,000 chickens to pay Mike 100,000 chickens. Mike's the only real creditor. Mike's the only thing that gave up the house. I'm the one that said, Ivan, I'll take your promissory obligation so long as its integrity is maintained by you contributing $100,000, 100,000 chickens to the overall pool of wealth, so I can spend the $100,000 on the 100,000 chickens. Okay? That's how I get my 100,000 chickens in this kind of economy base where promissory obligations rightly serve to represent our entitlement. Okay? But when the bank comes in the equation and says, no, they can't, promissory obligation can't represent your entitlement anymore because you have to borrow them from us at cost. So you sign a contract to issue a promissory obligation for the same amount. The real creditor gets that amount, and the bank claims that amount to itself, enriching itself 100,000 chickens for just in principle, for merely issuing a piece of paper. It's an ancient ruse. It's what put Jesus Christ on the cross. It's as simple as that. It's like, whew, that's an amazing thing to issue paper and to dispossess the world for producing nothing, pretending money has to be borrowed from you when you're actually only producing a further representation of a promissory obligation, and to defraud the world out of all of its production and means of production by this is certainly criminal. Why isn't the money owed the bank? Because the bank never gave up anything worth a house or 100,000 chickens which were promised to pay for it. The bank gave up a piece of paper. It just took out its pen and it wrote on that piece of paper, Ivan promises to give you 100,000 chickens.
Yeah.
And
just on that point alone, Mike, a few pennies just dropped. Ambassador just got it, and another guy, Martin, just got it as well.
Totally awesome.
And so everybody who don't get it, every time that you see around you, people get it, and people saying they got it, you should really reevaluate what have you been doing in the past few days, weeks, month, really, with your time. Because there's, I'm sorry for interrupting there, Mike.
No, I'm listening.
Do you want to finish that point?
No, I'm glad to listen. We've really gone around the same cycle a whole lot of times.
If you just want to finish that point there, if you don't mind. If you go on YouTube, there's loads of these. Like I've been saying this for a few months, I think already. On YouTube, there's loads of these documentaries, about the regions of humanity and God knows what, and they're all like huge. They're like 2, 3, 4 hours long. And if you find time to watch that, but you don't have time to educate yourself about how money is created, who you really have to blame, and then. Some people can come up here and say, oh, it's not explained to us properly, but I got it. There's people from other countries.
Once you do get it, yeah, right.
You from the English.
Oh, I've been hearing from Russia since the first days of the internet. I can't even read all the email I get from Russia. I got no idea what people are writing me, but quite often somebody from Russia writes me in English. There have been sites in Russia promoting my work since the early 90s. The Russians were some of the first people to promote my work. There are many other countries that do it. Over the last 10 years, it's been proliferated across the Islamic world, mostly by plagiarists who don't argue it perfectly well as well. And you'll also see many people pretend to explain, why the world is the way it is, actually taking from my work and trying to explain in some obtuse or general way, what they took from my work, and they explain it wrong. And I'm not saying you have to read me. After all, I'm not getting any money. Nobody's paying me for this. This is my own time, and most of the time, the people who do understand it only occasionally write thank you, whatever. And most of my life, all day long, every day, I hear constantly from about further plagiarists of my work and people who have taken it and converted it into something else. And the problem is, the truth is the truth, and I'm sorry, no Roger Hayes or anyone else has articulated it even correctly yet. I mean, people like you, Ivan, and and Dave Ardren in Australia, and countless other people. Over the years, Jim Eldon, Patrick Hedemark, who, bless his soul, is no longer with us. Great guy. I mean, the first email I got from this fellow Patrick Hedemark, and oh man, was he a great guy. I got an email, and I forget how many questions were on it. But there was a professor at the University of Colorado who in the later 70s, I met him after his son Jacques McPhee had written him about. Jacques and I were next door neighbors. We shared adjacent apartments and the same deck, and barbecued together regularly, our girlfriends and each other, and and I talked about mathematically perfected economy all the time, because we discussed, world affairs and whatnot. And Jock said to me one day, he said, my father's the head of the math staff of the University of Colorado. He said, would you mind if I wrote him about your monetary ideas? And I said, well, of course not. I never dreamed that the guy, this good friend's father would plagiarize my work or anything, and he never did. Many people do, most people do, and they do it without even getting it, and so the work that they proliferate is just wrong. I mean, everybody who's plagiarized my Parable of Perfect Economy doesn't even realize that it's not history, so they're pretending to have dug it up in their own research, and they're actually proving that they plagiarized me when they reproduce it. It's as stupid as stupid gets. But anyway, just for one story, so a few years later, Jock and Lisa got married, and they invited me back to Colorado Springs to the wedding, and I gladly went and rented forget if I rented a tux. I don't think I did, actually. Went to the wedding. I think I did for the wedding, and then for the wedding reception, I decided to go casual, and it was a big mistake. I got there, and there was this huge Victorian mansion. It's like 3 stories, had its own ballroom and everything, and it's all hardwood floors, with a stage and podium and everything, and I get to this thing in a rented car, and here's all these limousines pulling up and all these people in tuxedos getting out. I'm thinking, oh my God, because I'd switched to a pair of cowboy boots and worn out jeans and a wool shirt, So I thought, oh boy, I don't want to crash this party here, but so I'll maybe sneak in the back and see if I can't find Jock and Lisa and give my hugs and blessings and get the heck out of Dodge, and so I was talking about Patrick Hedemark, and what I was thinking about was his questions were just so incredible, and Vin's another one who called me up, and he had great questions. He understood this from the beginning, and I just had a 4-hour visit with a woman I'd never spoken to this morning before we went on the air, about mathematics. She got the whole thing. It wasn't even worth talking about mathematically perfected economy because it was like, she wanted to participate in the proliferation of it. She could articulate anything about this right now, and I can tell you that even though I hardly talked to her about mathematically perfected economy. We just talked about, a few things about it, and it was an incredibly great visit. But anyway, So I see some people go through the fence at this mansion to the backyard, and I thought, well, I'll follow them. Went through a gate and led around some back door, and they were in a short line of just a few people, most people going in the front, and so I follow them in this door, and lo and behold, it goes in the back corner of this pretty good sized kitchen, to this place, and there's Jock and Lisa just like I am, So I gave them both a big hug and congratulated them, and no sooner as I'd done that, I wasn't even finished, and Jock says to me, he says, Mike, and he no sooner said my name, and there was this gentleman about 70 years old in a tuxedo, 3 or 4 feet abreast of me, and he's talking with several other professors, and as soon as Jock said my name, the man standing there stopped and started to turn toward me, and he said, as Jock finished saying, I'd like to introduce you to my father. And this man reached his hand out to me and grabbed my hand and shook it forcefully and pulled me close to him with incredible gratification, saying, you're the one with the economic ideas. And a bit bashfully, I said, I'm in, my late 20s. I said, said a bit bashfully, I said, I suppose so, sir. And he didn't even let go of my hand for a half an hour. And these other professors were just incredibly interested in this. At time we had 20 and 30 professors in the kitchen listening to a discussion. We went from the beginning of mathematically perfected economy to the end of it. The obfuscation of the currency, solution of 3 categoric faults, implementation, transition, everything. Went out to ancient history, ancient Egypt, all these things that relate to this that we don't even talk about on TNS because people are interested more in aliens or something and alien encounters explaining monetary thesis evidently. I mean, I don't know what's going on anymore, but anyway, hours and hours and hours transpired, and then we finished. We got to the end of this in one sitting, and this man asked the best questions that had ever been asked in vivid detail, all the mathematics. We proved each part of the thesis as we went. And this man was perfect, the perfect audience and all this, and we finished. He says, how long are you going to be here? And I said, well, my plane leaves first thing in the morning. He goes, oh. Can I introduce you to some people? And I said, well, certainly. And I still can't hardly believe how much respect this man had. He must have, I don't know a lot about him. He must have had a great integrity because we just went to the first room next to the kitchen, which was a huge dining room, and it was full of people, many sitting at a big table eating, others standing around talking and all. And as soon as we appeared in the doorway, everyone fell silent immediately. And this happened in every room of this mansion. We went through every floor. And Will said, can I have your all attention a moment? I'd like to introduce this young fellow, Mike Montagne here, and he's a monetary theorist. He's got this idea that he calls mathematically perfected economy, that any economy based on interest-bearing debt inevitably terminates itself under terminal sums of insoluble debt which are unrecoverable. And he's produced a singular solution and a way to immediately transform any such system as we now suffer into mathematically perfected economy, not only immediately but even virtually without cost. And I would like, if you will, to meet us in the ballroom. I think that this is Mike has to leave in the morning, and this is our only opportunity to hear about this, and it's truly probably the most important thing you'll ever hear about in your life. And everyone would promise to meet us in the ballroom, and we go to the next room and the next room, and we went every floor of this mansion, and he just looked at his watch each time, and he had decided an hour from a certain point. And we go finally to the ballroom, and there's a stage and a podium, and there's, public address system, and it's, state of the art, We took the podium, and this man had like a photographic memory. We went through the whole discussion. And it was getting light outside before we finished, and everyone's interest was just riveted on this. There was 3 people that left. They left together about 2 in the morning. A man raised his hand. He was standing with 2 women. He said, "Excuse me, Will, I hate to interrupt this. This is like the most fascinating thing I've ever heard in my life. But our daughter was married this morning also, and we haven't been to her reception yet. We really do have to leave. I'm very sorry about this." So those were the only 3 people to have left, So people who claim that they can't understand this, the truth is they can't understand it. They can understand it from what we've already said. You need to review these things. It's just, it's like when I was attending this lecture I told about in 1975 in Alaska, given by this man from Toronto, Canada. Jacques Walker was his name, who originally provided these quotes of Jefferson and Franklin, which are preserved in my work. They have no other source. No one has ever discovered an original source of that material, and yet this man didn't understand the obfuscation of the currency and the implications of Jefferson's quote, even that he would have created it. So it's by accident or whatever that he misquoted Jefferson.
Sorry, Mike, just to come back to that previous story you told, Pondy was asking, and I'm sure some of the other listeners were wondering as well, who were those people again that you were talking to?
Well, the man that I was speaking about, his name was Will McPhee, and this was the later part of the 1970s. Jacques had been writing to his father for several years, and we had deep conversations on our porch, and barbecued chicken every night, and steaks, and have a cocktail or 2, and really, really good neighbor situation. And Jacques began writing his father about my ideas, and he explained mathematically perfected economy in his own words to his father, bit by bit. And this man had this incredible amount of correspondence about this. So his name was Will McPhee. He was, I think, when Jacques was first writing him, he was the head of the math staff of the University of Colorado. Pretty well-known mathematician, and that's not the only time my work has pervaded the University of Colorado. In the early 90s, a fellow emailed me. Thanking me for my work and praising my work and notifying me that he had posted my theses on the University of Colorado's so-called long waves forum, which discusses the Kondratiev theorem, which is just a mathematic method of trying to project when business cycles will occur. So they have a failure. They actually have a failure for this kind of economy themselves, but they don't identify its causes. They just recognize the pattern. So they call these things the Kondratiev winter is what we're in now. Anyway, so my work had been posted there, and it had erupted in a tremendous debate among the top economists in the world. It was just a vicious, throat-cutting debate, and this guy just apprised me that he had done this, and he thought I should jump in there. So I joined the forums and responded to the arguments, and the financial people were so vicious, trying to discredit this by ad hominem, or what are your credentials, where did you go to college, that kind of thing. that I mean, it just got to be a hideous affair, which actually destroyed the forums because these are all professional people and they all left, and it ended more or less when a fellow named Bob Bronson of Bronson Capital Markets, he's a financial prophet, you might say. He takes patterns, mathematic patterns, and projects what's going to happen in the stock market. And he's really quite well respected mathematically. I don't have a lot of respect for him, but since that day, I've subscribed to his newsletter because he basically offered the final argument against me. He said that the failure that my work projected would never happen because everyone would simply just write off their debts, you know. And I was so tired of the preposterous arguments, of course I thought, well, sure, people are just going to write off their debts or write down their debts. How do you write down a mortgage? How do you write down your credit card debt? Well, people are trying, but that doesn't resolve it to what it ought to be. Yet I'd already provided all the arguments, and what could I do but repeat them? It was these financial people who just wanted to think that something was wrong with mathematically perfected economy so they could go on as money changers, and that was it. So I just quit logging in or participating at all anymore. I just left. I mean, it's not because I'm a quitter. I'd already provided the arguments, and these people had no valid argument against me. All the arguments had been disproven. And the person who had originally introduced me to this, and many other people wrote me afterwards and told me that those forums had completely disintegrated. There was no integrity in them anymore. Professionals weren't relying on them, and But so this debate over mathematically perfected economy in the early '90s, there, basically destroyed those forums. I have no idea if they've been revived since. That's over 20 years ago, But just the same, I look at Bob Bronson's work, because I've been on his newsletter ever since. I recently got a notice that he's going to start charging for it, so I'm not going to subscribe to it any longer. But basically, all of his projections concur with his failure, and he's even stated himself in many different ways, that there's impossibility of writing down or writing off, our debts, and that's why, this thing just has to work itself out, and he's projecting it won't do that for at least another 10 years at this point, So, in truth, his work, his later work, has only agreed with mine, and people, of course, they're not writing down their debt, and even if they do, to some degree, all that does is keep us at the brink of terminal failure all the longer, because interest is going to continue to multiply debt upon us, so we'll get right back up to a terminal sum of debt before you know it. Yeah, write it down a little bit, big deal. That just basically what it does is it launders the money that we borrow into circulation directly into the pockets of the bankers again. It's enriching the crap out of these people at the cost of keeping us, restricting us to the brink of terminal failure. I mean, it's stupid for us to want that or to think it relieves it, but that's what people take relief from. They think, oh, good, they're going to reduce everybody's mortgage 25% tomorrow, for instance. Say they do that, everybody would rejoice. Okay, well, great. It would be an immediate relief to some extent, but the only effect of it is going to be that we'll be able to service the other debts that we can't service as much. They'll start to raise federal taxes again, and claim that they're, imposing austerity. Well, the fact of the matter is, the reason they can't impose austerity, and austerity will never work, is federal debt's already terminal. And we're already taxed so much that we can't afford to service federal debt. So although we're assuming more federal debt, we're not servicing it. So it's not hurting us in cost because taxes haven't been raised since this massive accumulation began approximately 1975 to 1980, in there. So, we have an escalation that we can't service. Yes, it would hurt us if we were servicing it, but we're not. So the lack of austerity is actually the only thing that's keeping the economies alive, the lie of economy alive, because they're effectively just pouring money into circulation by federal overspending. That's the only thing that's maintaining a minimal circulation owing to how much we're paying out of it in the way of private debt. That's why we're not awash in money, as Ron Paul keeps trying to claim, by saying, continually reusing this stupid expression that money's being created out of thin air. It's not our problem. The problem is the obfuscation of our promissory obligations perpetually multiplies falsified indebtedness into terminal indebtedness. No matter what we do to relieve a little bit of it, it's just a temporary band-aid that immediately goes away because whatever money they pour into circulation, we pay out of circulation. They need to pour more money into circulation. They need to perpetually pour money into circulation because we're perpetually paying humongous amounts of money out of circulation. So until you fix the cause of the problem, which is the obfuscation of the currency, and which is only fixed by restoring the debts to what I'm claiming they should be under mathematically perfected economy. Note, this is not a matter of opinion. This isn't Mike Montagne's opinion. This is the math. It's not a debt to the bank. That's what the promissory obligation is. Interest is not justified. All interest should have counted toward principal. Therefore, the only proper rate of payment is an obligatory schedule of payment at the rate of consumption of related property, because more is a crime against some people and less is a crime against others. Simple as that. So that's it. That resolves the debt to all it is. And if you did that today, whether you do it individually as true sovereign individuals standing for justice, or you do it through government, through this mandate, which is the other thing that the mandate is doing, it's not excuse me, it's not asking government to give us mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. It's saying that's the only thing we are accepting as government, and any other government is no longer valid. You see, that's sovereignty, And so that solution's already existed. And when and if we ever do that, you won't have any need for Roger Hayes' purportedly lawful bank. It's no lawful bank at all. I mean, I've talked to legal people for hours and hours and hours over many periods of time, where, I'm fully apprised you can't just form a bank. Any bank that's formed in the world has to be formed under laws that exist. You have to modify the laws before you can create what Roger wants to create and call a lawful bank. It is not a lawful bank. It is an unlawful bank. And it's just a lie that it solves anything or that Roger solved anything. Roger cannot be trusted.
Yeah. So listen, Mike, we pretty much coming up to 12. So I think what we mainly cover today is Roger's suggestion for a solution to the economy. And if people were listening, I know a few people were saying that you keep going on and on about Roger. But I mean, I don't really see that.
Roger goes on and on, and he's working more and more on a bright public image and drawing more and more people to them. And Roger's not going away. Yeah. Roger would go away if everyone challenged him, but as long as we're not doing that, Roger's a problem.
Yeah.
Paul Green knows a problem.
Yeah, I must say there are people right now in the chat box that well, how would you describe that? I don't really know how to describe it. I mean, I don't see people who type these irrelevant things about MPE, don't really get MPE. I'm happy, more than happy, to help people understand it. If you don't understand it, and all you can say is, I don't get it, how come I get it? How come all the other people get it? I'm sorry, if you don't get it and you can't, if you come up and you say you don't get MPE, and you can't even pose a proper question, what is it you're asking? What does it show? Did you actually try to understand it? If you can't even formulate a question about an aspect of MPE, the faults, the causes, if you can't formulate a proper question, then you haven't looked at it. And if you haven't looked at it and you come up and you're saying it wasn't explained to me, then I'm sorry. You need to go and look at it. We can try and explain, but if you have been listening, you would have got at least something. But if you're not listening and you're busy typing away stuff in the chat box and slagging people and just making jokes, then at the same time you come in and saying I don't get it, but it's being explained. So
what people, I deal with this kind of person all the time, and generally they're a person that they actually have no genuine intention of understanding solution. They might want to invest in Roger Hayes Bank, for instance, and they object to the fact that Roger has, just been dismembered. So, and that's the best that they can do, is they can just say they don't get it. They can't disprove any part of it. They don't want to raise a question so that we re-explain what's obvious again to them. So they just make it's childish, and personally, it's evil, because if you want to understand, you ask a question. You don't make an assertion. I don't understand it. It's as if you're trying to say it's incomprehensible. And there's just a few people. I mean, if you don't understand it, you don't deserve representation. You don't even know what representation is. You haven't even done your responsibility as a citizen. And that's okay. What Roger Hayes wants you to do is to just think he solved the problems by just telling you that interest doesn't exist. So what he wants you to do is give up $10,000 of your 10,000 euros so that he can give you $100,000 of liquidity, as he put it, and and you're cool there. And what you need to do is give Roger your money and see where it goes, and maybe you'll figure it out someday. But if you can't ask a question, we can't answer it. And if you're just saying it's incomprehensible, that's pathetic. That's like you probably don't know how to order breakfast. For crying out loud. What do you want to say? There's no sense at all to money. We don't have to give it any sense. We just made it complicated because once again in one evening we'd answer every issue about money. Once again, twice again, 3 times again, 4 times again in a single evening, and you don't get it? Well, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we better call it a night then. Thanks again, Ivan.
Thank you, Mike.
I'll sign off here and hang on, and we can chat afterwards. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks again, Ivan.
Thanks
Appreciate it, buddy. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Good night.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Night, everyone.